The House Committee on the Judiciary will come to order. Without objection, the Chair is authorized to declare recesses of the committee at any time. We welcome everyone to this afternoon's hearing on diversity in America, the representation of people of color in the media. Before we begin, I would like to remind members that we have established an email address and distribution list dedicated to circulating exhibits, motions, or other written materials that members might want to offer as part of our hearing today. If you would like to submit materials, please send them to the email address that has been previously distributed to your offices, and we will circulate the materials to members and staff as quickly as we can. I would also remind all members that guidance from the Office of Attending Physician states that face coverings are required at all meetings in an enclosed space such as committee meetings. Everybody attending this hearing is required to follow this guidance, except while speaking, and I will not recognize members to speak who are not in compliance with these rules. If you do not wish to put on a mask, you have the option to participate in this hearing remotely. Finally, I would ask all members, both those in person and those appearing remotely, to mute your microphones when you are not speaking. This will help prevent feedback and other technical issues. You may unmute yourself anytime you seek recognition. I will now recognize myself for an opening statement. In recent months, our country has engaged in a much-needed reflection on the role that race and ethnicity play in our society. This reckoning is echoing in the halls of Congress, in our streets, and in boardrooms. As with so many industries across the country, it has also generated self-reflection in the entertainment industry. Today, the committee continues its examination of race in America, with a focus on the representation of people of color in the media. I am fortunate to represent a district that touches nearly every aspect of the entertainment industry in some way. I have seen firsthand the many economic and cultural benefits that the performing arts deliver to communities across the country. And I hope that today's discussion will help further our shared goal of fully representing the rich diversity of American society, both on screen and behind the camera. The media plays a particularly important role in our society. Movies, television, and increasingly content available through streaming services are the mediums by which Americans are inspired and entertained. Motion pictures and television programs are also the means by which Americans are exposed to ideas and representations of life different from their own. When the entertainment industry has diverse faces in front of the camera, the viewing public sees stories that resonate with their lives and that understands that these stories and experiences are valued and appreciated. It is important, however, that we are also mindful of the power that visual media has to reinforce negative images of racial and ethnic minorities when there is inadequate representation. To be clear, it would be wrong to draw a direct connection between what is portrayed on screen and the racial divide that is reflected in society. After 250 years of slavery, 100 more years of Jim Crow, and 50 more years and counting of structural racism in our country, there is plenty of blame to go around and plenty of work to be done in all levels of government, in the boardrooms, in our schools, and in our criminal justice system. And there is no doubt that the divisive rhetoric and fear-mongering that emanates from the White House every day is making things worse, not better. But without accurate representation of racial and ethnic minorities in the media, negative stereotypes and tropes may be perpetuated in society, which can ultimately lead to dehumanization and demonization. Unfortunately, studies that have reviewed diversity in the media highlight the challenges we face. In 2019, people of color accounted for only 27% of actors in lead roles in nearly 150 major films. While this number has almost tripled from 10.5% in 2011, representing a significant improvement on the part of the industry, it does not match the 40% that minorities represent in the U.S. population overall, which should be seen as a floor, not a ceiling. The entertainment industry can and should do better. Talent has no race or gender. Creativity is a gift that, when matched with hard work, can lead to enormous economic and social impacts. It is incumbent on the entertainment industry to ensure that opportunities are afforded to all who wish to pursue their talents. Studies show that the best way to improve representation in front of the camera is to have diversity behind the camera, but sufficient diversity is lacking off-screen as well. Ultimately, it is the directors, writers, producers, and executives who determine what stories are told and who is featured in these stories. The lack of adequate minority representation is an industry-wide phenomenon, and it should be a collective effort to make improvements. I appreciate that the industry is aware of the problem and that it is focused on fixing it. A number of industry leaders and groups are working together to address basic pipeline problems, and they are also focused on further diversifying the industry. For example, just earlier this month, in a positive development, the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences announced new criteria that will require, beginning in 2024, that films hoping to qualify for the Best Picture Oscars category meet specific diversity standards in front of and behind the camera. Hopefully, these actions by the Academy will help set a standard going forward, and for all films to prioritize diversity throughout all aspects of a production. I recognize that our discussion today comes at a time when the entertainment industry is facing an existential threat, COVID-19, which is challenging and threatening every element of its business. This disease has had a devastating economic impact across the nation, not to mention the human toll of hundreds of thousands of lives cost. Within the entertainment industry, it has shut down theater productions in my district indefinitely, and it has dramatically curtailed film productions throughout the country. It is impacting all those who work in the motion picture industry. Of particular concern, the pandemic is having a disproportionate impact on people of color who work in the industry and who do not have jobs that can be easily transposed to a laptop. Moreover, the pandemic is particularly impacting people of color who are women, LGBTQ, and/or disabled. Their already limited participation in jobs in the film industry has been hampered now even more. As I've made clear throughout this crisis, I am committed to working in partnership with the entertainment industry to ensure that its economic revival is stronger than ever. As productions return to work, however, I hope the industry will take the opportunity to renew its commitment to diversity, on screen and off. I want to thank the Congressional Tri-Caucus, the Hispanic Caucus, the Black Caucus, and the Asian Pacific American Caucus for their leadership in bringing attention to this important issue and for spurring action to address it. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses about their personal experiences and about how we can best move forward together. I now recognize the ranking member of the Judiciary Committee, the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Jordan, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Even the media is not woke enough for the Democrats. Hollywood's not woke enough for the Democrats. 96% of media, their political contributions in 2016 went to Democrats. Almost all of Hollywood, we're going to hear from a witness today, we'll talk about this. Almost all of Hollywood supports the Democrats, but that's not good enough. This hearing proves no one is safe from the cancel culture. No one is safe from the mob. They will come after you. Look no further than Barry Weiss, former editor at the New York Times, who had to resign because she was engaged, as she said in her piece when she resigned, wrongthink. Barry Weiss said this. She said this in that resignation letter. You say something the mob doesn't like, get ready for, quote, the digital Thunderdome. I don't know anyone could say it better than that. That's what happens. You disagree with the mob, they come after you. They'll come after you, and their goal is silence. Recent survey, 62% of Americans say they're afraid to freely express themselves. This is the Judiciary Committee. We should remember this. You don't have a First Amendment when people are afraid to speak. You don't have free speech when only one side's allowed to talk. Think about the sports world. Subject one of our witnesses knows a little bit about. Drew Brees says, stand for the anthem. Oh my goodness. Did he get attacked? James Harden wears a mask that says back the blue. Appropriate thing to do. Frankly, something that should have been mentioned at the outset of this hearing. Last night, 2 officers were shot. This is the second full hearing we've had following a tragedy where officers were attacked, and the chairman says nothing. We should be thinking and praying for those families. James Harden wears back the blue mask. He gets attacked. My favorite, this is how crazy the mob gets. Mike Gundy, football coach at Oklahoma State, 15-year coach, played at Oklahoma State, goes fishing with his kids, fishing with his family, and wears the wrong T-shirt, according to the mob. Wears a T-shirt that has a conservative news outlet on the front, the name of one. Oh my goodness, how dare he do that? For all we know, he picked the top T-shirt on the pile that day. He's gone fishing with his family. He almost lost his job for fishing in the wrong T-shirt. That is what the mob will do. The mob never stops. Political correctness has no end. And now the Democrats are pursuing this so much, they're even going after their best friends in the world, the media in Hollywood. 2019, this gets bigger. Speaking of Hollywood, 2019, China pressured the film industry to remove images of the Japanese and Taiwanese flags from a trailer for the Top Gun sequel. MGM, involved with the remake of the film Red Dawn, altered the identities of the invading military. I'm so old, I remember the first one where it was the Soviet Union. And they did this post-production. Said, no, it can't be an invading military from China. It's got to be North Korea. Attorney generals pointed out that many scripts likely never see the light of day because writers and producers know that they can't even test the limits. They're going to be attacked again by the mob, and today, obviously, by the Democrats. But this isn't the worst. This isn't the worst of it. Silence is not enough for the mob. And this is the scariest part. It's not enough that you be quiet. It's not enough that you can't exercise your free speech rights, your First Amendment liberties. That's not enough. They want you to agree with them. They want to force you to agree with them. You don't believe me? Go watch the videotape. Come into a restaurant. Harass you if you don't raise your fist. Harass you if you don't bend your knee. This is scary. And the idea that this committee is having a hearing to foster more of it instead of to speak out against it is even more scary. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today. I hope the Judiciary Committee, with, as I've said so many times, the storied history of protecting the Constitution, the rule of law, and the Bill of Rights, will say this has got to stop. This has got to stop. And frankly, you all had a chance. A few weeks ago, 8 weeks ago, when the Attorney General was here, he asked the chairman and the Democrats on this committee, why won't you speak out against the violence? Why won't you speak out against the mob? And guess what he got? Total silence. Let's speak out now. Let's speak out now. Let's say the First Amendment is sacrosanct. Let's say what's going on is wrong, plain wrong. And I think, well, certainly 62% of Americans understand it. It's wrong and we shouldn't be promoting it. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Without objection, all other opening statements will be included in the record. I will now introduce today's witnesses. Erica Alexander is an actress, writer, director, producer, and entrepreneur. She is also the co-founder of Color Farm Media, an entertainment, innovation, and social impact company. Edward James Olmos is an Emmy Award-winning actor, producer, and director who has appeared in a number of films and television shows throughout his distinguished career. Daniel Dai Kim is an actor, producer, and director. He is also founder and CEO of 3AD Media, a production company. Joy Villa is a songwriter, recording artist, actress, and author who has toured the world extensively performing music. Jason Whitlock is a sports writer, TV personality, radio host, and podcaster, currently working at Outkick, a sports and culture website. He previously worked at the Kansas City Star and Fox Sports and founded ESPN's website, The Undefeated. Dr. Stacy Smith is an associate professor of communications and the founder and director of the Annenberg Inclusion Initiative at the Annenberg School for Communication and Journalism at the University of Southern California. She received her PhD from the University of California, Santa Barbara. Karen Temple is Senior Executive Vice President and Global General Counsel at the Motion Picture Association. Prior to joining MPA, she served more than 8 years in the U.S. Copyright Office, most recently as the Register of Copyrights. She received her BA from the University of Michigan and her JD from Columbia University School of Law, a wonderful school in my district. We welcome all of our distinguished witnesses and we thank them for their participation. Now, if you would please rise, I will begin by swearing you in. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is true and correct to the best of your knowledge, information, and beliefs, so help you God? Let the record show the witnesses answered in the affirmative. Thank you, and please be seated. Please note that each of your written statements will be entered into the record in its entirety. Accordingly, I ask that you summarize your testimony in 5 minutes. To help you stay within that time, there is a timing light on the witness table. When the light switches from green to yellow, you have 1 minute to conclude your testimony. When the light turns red, it signals your 5 minutes have expired. For our witnesses appearing virtually, there is a timer on your screen to help you keep track of time. Mr. Alexander, I want to note that we are joined in the room by Representative Castro, the chair of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, who has been a leader on the issues we are discussing today. Ms. Alexander, you may begin.
Thank you. I've been a card-carrying union member and a professional in show business for 37 years, so I'm uniquely qualified to have this discussion. I'll also talk about the core tenet that guides my life and progress, that representation matters and how one character can impact the lives and psychology of today's viewers. I'll address the big picture, and like Deep Throat, I'll tell you to follow the money. Now, I'm a girl from Flagstaff, Arizona. My mother was a teacher. My father was an itinerant preacher. They were both orphans. They had 6 kids. We lived in the Twilight Hotel, 2-bedroom shack off of Route 66. Perhaps some of you know me from my television film work on The Cosby Show, Living Single and Get Out. I'm a 2-time NAACP Best Actress winner, and I've done 6 plays at the Public Theater in New York City. You may know me as the producer of the recent John Lewis documentary, Good Trouble. I'm proud to be a working actor, proud to have made my living in entertainment, but I'm not one of the lucky ones. For too long, people of color, women, LGBTQ people, people with disabilities were not represented in the mainstream media. And if they were, it was through harmful stereotypes. Media images have power to shape opinion and lives, for good or ill. I know firsthand that representation matters because of what I call the Maxine Shaw effect. The character of Maxine Shaw, the lawyer that I portrayed on the hit television series Living Single, has inspired thousands of people to pursue education and careers in law and politics. The character even inspired Stacey Abrams and your esteemed colleague, Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley. Maxine Shaw, a groundbreaking fictional Black character, inspired trailblazing real-life Black achievers. And when we say representation matters, we don't just mean on screen, but behind the camera, in the trades, in the departments, and most importantly, in the room where it happens, where decisions are made. Let's talk about the big picture for a second. I've seen and experienced structural racism and discrimination that is part of the unwritten fabric of Hollywood. When a television show can have only so many Black characters before it becomes a Black show and is relegated to the cultural ghetto, that's structural racism. When executives' presumed prejudices lead to the casting of only white or light-skinned Black actresses in shows or films that need to make part of their profit overseas, that's structural racism, even though we live in an increasingly diverse world. Here's my experience as a dark-skinned Black actress. Certain doors would never be open to me, no matter my accomplishments. When I was young, I would never be cast as an ingenue, like my white age peers. When I starred for 5 years on the hit network comedy Living Single, my pay and that of my co-stars was only a small fraction of what our white counterparts were making on Friends from the same studio. My friend Viola Davis put it well in 2008 interview with Porter magazine. If Caucasian women were getting 50% of what white men were being paid, we're not even getting a quarter of what white women are getting paid. Frustrated with the opportunities available, I expanded my skill set and taught myself how to write and to create my own entertainment properties. But here too, I encountered structural racism. I created a science fiction film and pitched it around town. I was dismayed and disheartened when a white male studio head told me I was wasting my time, that Black people don't like science fiction because they don't see themselves in the future. He's saying this to me, a daughter of the people who created jazz, rock and roll, hip hop. We are the original futurists in American culture, but this well-paid white gatekeeper was telling me he knew better. And I meet those same people in talent agencies and management companies that set the tone for the town and set the value and the price of my work. If you want to see what and who Hollywood values, follow the money. Yes, there's been some change. Yes, Black Panther, Hamilton, and Crazy Rich Asians made a lot of money. Talk about one of the lucky ones. But for every extraordinary exception like that, there are hundreds more mediocre films with white casts that get greenlit, filmed, marketed, and awarded each year. The lack of diversity in the executive suite leads to this ongoing pandemic of exclusion on the cultural stage. I would suggest to remedy this state of affairs, well, the one supervillain Black Panther would not defeat is the racist infrastructure of this industry. So the hero we need is us, we the people. And to address this complex issue, it will take more than a village. It will take a nation. The government should incentivize companies to support and fund marginalized content creators. Though artists and entertainers have been vilified as everything from radicals to spoiled babies, what we really are small business people who make America's #1 export and key to our soft power in the world, entertainment. I say support minority small businesses. What we've done, I've created Color Farm Media, a company dedicated to finding new voices. We call ourselves the Motown of film, television, and tech. Our goal is to rebrand Blackness. It's why we made the John Lewis documentary Good Trouble, why I'm making a film about the legendary Boys Choir of Harlem, and why I'm directing a documentary about reparations. The seeds of the future are planted in the stories of today. Only certain stories are told, only certain lives matter. Going forward, diversity and true representation in our stories, in our entertainment, will ensure that Black lives matter too. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Olmos. All right, Mr. Olmos, you may want to unmute.
I'm on mute. I'm waiting for the video.
You've got it. You're okay now.
Yes. Can you please play the video?
Oh.
Film influences the human mind. It's a very powerful medium.
The way you address diversity is by going back to the drawing board and starting in 4th grade.
The mission of the Youth Cinema Project is very simple. It's about closing the achievement gap in the classroom for our most underprivileged children and to close the opportunity gap in the entertainment industry for our communities of color.
Scene 5, cat, take 2.
The program involves 2 filmmaking mentors going into the classroom, and they teach the entire process of film. So how to generate ideas, how to write the script, all the planning and pre-production, filming itself in production as well as post. They go through the process treating the students as colleagues rather than lecturing to them.
Action! Get in the car! Don't leave! Cut!
It's inspired the community to the point of where kids are actually attending school more.
We talk about project-based learning. So rather than just taking a book and talking about a particular set of concepts in the book, it's got a practical application.
I've learned to not be shy and to believe in myself and to never give up.
The biggest thing I learned in this program was to collaborate with others to express themselves.
I think it's just a different way to approach learning.
This is the only program I know that brings an industry, in this case, entertainment industry, into the classroom, into the school site, into the district.
Creativity, critical thinking, communication, and collaboration. All those values are so much a part of filmmaking.
We create lifelong learners and lifelong problem solvers. This is the only program I know where teachers, principals, superintendents, and board members are saying this gets 100% engagement.
I think this program should be around again. There's other programs, it's more like look at the board and you're just gonna learn this. And here in film, you actually got to mess around with equipment.
Why not sound? Sound? Camera? Rolling. J1, C2, take 3, mark. Action!
Why are you here?
Same reason you are.
George, get back here!
I mean, I wish I would have had this class when I was in the 4th grade. My work would have been completely different.
Our ultimate goal is to try to get the Youth Cinema Project inside every 4th grade class throughout the United States.
I am the founder and the creator of the Youth Cinema Project, and I'm very honored and proud of it.
Self-esteem, self-respect, and self-worth is what we're talking about here today. I think Inesco said it best. Inesco, I mean, it is not the answer that illuminates, it's the question. The question is diversity in America, the representation of people of color in the media. It still does not exist. You got to remember, we're talking about the single most important art form the humans have ever created. Nothing attacks the subconscious mind more. You sit down in front of a theater screen with a dark room, and you sit with stereo sound around you with no peripheral vision. Everything goes into the subconscious, everything. And it stays there. And I'll tell you right now, if you don't think it affects you, try going after seeing Jaws and jump in the water and the beach. Now, the situation is this. I played this because collaboration, communication, critical thinking, and creativity is what makes us who we are and builds self-esteem, self-respect. So do the images that we see. Now, the problem with the United States film industry and the industry in general is that it has a habit of not allowing certain stories to be told because they don't make enough money, they say. But really, in essence, They are trying to do things that are actually stifling the diversity in this country. For instance, go back to, I ask anybody in this room, especially you sitting at this congressman here, listen, name me one American of Mexican descent Medal of Honor winner that you have ever seen portrayed on a screen in the United States of America on a film. You can't. Why? Because there's never been one. The closest we ever got really was a Silver Star recipient, Guy Gabaldon, Jesus. All I can tell you is this, Guy, what he did, he brought in he was called the Pied Piper of Saipan. Now, what he did, he brought in 1,500 Japanese to surrender during the attack on Saipan. He brought them in by himself without any weapons. He talked them in and brought them in. He got a Silver Star. Now, the funny thing is Sergeant Alvin York in World War I did 10 times less than what he did in bringing in surrendering enemy, and he got a Medal of Honor. You start to see what I'm talking about. But guess what? Guy Gambaldon movie was played and made in 1960. And the person who played him was Jeffrey Hunter. We got hit again just most recently with Argo, when one of our great heroes, CIA agent Tony Mendez, was portrayed. And guess what? No one even knew that he was Latino, because the actor, director, and great actor, great director, decided that I guess he could get more money to make the movie if he used himself as the actor, even though I think the director and the fact that he was using one of the great script writers ended up saying to him flat out, I mean, they ended up making this movie, and what ended up happening is they had the best film of the year. But why couldn't he have put in someone like Michael Pena, Andy Garcia, Jimmy Smits, Benjamin Bratt, one of the many, many great artists that we have in the leading role, and allowed that situation to happen? I got to tell you right now, we have a future, and the future in understanding that diversity is the key, and we're not doing it.
Thank you very much. We'll now hear from Daniel Day Kim.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Jordan, and members of the Judiciary Committee. It is a pleasure to be here with you today, but to be honest, when I was approached to be a part of this hearing, I initially declined. I thought, why do we need to have a hearing about the importance of diversity in media? It seems self-evident that from its creation, America as we know it has been built on the principles of freedom, freedom of religion, freedom from tyranny, freedom of speech. In fact, the very words inscribed at the base of the Statue of Liberty echo with the resounding power of these ideas. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. The wretched refuse of your teeming shores, send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. Now these words signify freedom and safe harbor to all who have suffered, regardless of from where they came. Nowhere does it specify that these ideals only apply to those who are white, or male, or Catholic, or heterosexual. Almost by definition, they are an invitation to diversity, diversity of thought, and diversity of people. So I thought, why would Congress need to hear from me on this subject? And then I remembered House Resolution 908, passed just this past Friday. I'm sure you guys recall it. It was a bill that simply asked to condemn and denounce anti-Asian sentiment, racism, discrimination, and religious intolerance related to COVID-19. To me, that was a no-brainer. Who wouldn't support condemning racism in 2020, a full 50 years after the Civil Rights Movement? But as I looked at the roll call, I saw that 164 representatives in the House voted against it. That's more than a third of the members of Congress, and more than 80% of the Republican members of the House, including some of you watching right now, that could not simply say that anti-Asian sentiment is wrong and should be condemned. Now you may ask yourself, what does anti-Asian sentiment have to do with representation and diversity in media? Well, as one of my favorite artists, Jenny Holzer, says, all things are delicately interconnected. The media has always been a reflection of our values and culture. From the early days of television and the popularity of shows like Dick Van Dyke, The Ed Sullivan Show, and Leave It to Beaver, we got a glimpse into what it meant to be American in the 50s. They were clean-cut times when the biggest problem for our hero was being the only boy invited to a girl's birthday party. Now, that's an actual storyline, by the way. Now, one look at how different programming is today is a simple reminder of how much our society has changed. A show like Breaking Bad or Atlanta or Rami would hardly make sense in the context of America in the 50s. Now, another way that our storytelling has changed is the perspective from which our stories are told. In the 60s, all we had to say was, look, up in the sky, it's a bird, it's a plane, to know that our hero was coming to save the day. A hero that was inevitably white. In fact, he was so white that even though he was actually an alien from a planet 27 light years away, he was able to fool everyone into thinking he was actually from Kansas. But things are changing, and now one of the growing number of exceptions to that rule also happens to be America's highest grossing superhero film of all time, Black Panther, a film with African-American leads, African-American heroes. Rethinking the paradigm to encourage diversity is one of the primary reasons I created my own production company. I believe that we as creators and producers must work to create fully realized characters from all places and backgrounds and showcase them in stories where they can lead, be heroes, be complex, or in some cases, just be simple slice of life folks like the Cleavers. It's my belief that the diversity that has made this country great can and should be reflected in our entertainment in front of and behind the camera. I do have a confession to make, though. Like Ranking Member Jordan, I can't wait for the day that we no longer have to have hearings like this about diversity. I can't wait for the day that people can say, can you believe there was a time where people thought all Latino Americans were illegal immigrants, or that all Muslims were terrorists, or that Black lives didn't matter? That's the goal. To have so many different portrayals of races that, as Martin Luther King so eloquently put it, people can be judged by the content of their character and not the color of their skin. And I would also add to that, not who they love, not which God they worship, or what disability they may have. Perhaps then, when a bill like 908 comes up, our elected representatives can unanimously show empathy and support for Asian Americans, who, according to a recent report, have been victims of more than 2,800 acts of discrimination just since March. I look forward to the future when hate crimes and racism become nothing more than a relic from a shameful past. Proper representation in the media is one of the most powerful ways we can make that future a reality. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Villa.
Mr. Chairman, ranking members, and members of this committee, thank you for inviting me to speak. My name is Joy Villa. I'm a #1 Billboard artist, actress, and conservative actress. I've lived with and dealt with this topic for my entire life. I've never taken a day off from being a woman of color. I'm the author of Kick-Ass Conservative. I produced it and starred in a new film. I've toured over 35 countries, and I proudly support President Donald J. Trump and the sovereignty of the American people. I'm mixed race. I'm Black, Choctaw Native American on my mother's side. I'm Italian and Argentinian on my father's side. I'm extremely proud of my diverse background. I strongly believe in and have fought for diversity. Many of my peers in Hollywood and media proudly promote diversity of race, background, heritage, sexuality, religion, and culture, as they should. The Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences wants to mandate diversity in the Oscars nomination process. This is wrong. I would like to be hired for the role because I'm the best person for the job, not because my color or gender checks a mandated box. That's tokenism. Until I came out as a Trump supporter by wearing a fabulous Make America Great Again dress to the Grammys 4 years ago, I'd never been blacklisted. Back in 2015, talk show host Jimmy Kimmel talked favorably with Kelly Osbourne about one of my red carpet gowns. This was before I was a conservative. In 2018, Ava DuVernay, the celebrated Black filmmaker who said she wants to use more Black actresses in her films and have more diversity, blocked me on Twitter. I was blacklisted from industry events. I was not welcome on talk shows. I was not included in pop culture magazines or publications unless as the butt of a joke. Rolling Stone magazine told my publicist they would not write about me because of my politics. One casting director called me that Trump bitch. I've been called a race traitor, an Uncle Tom, Aunt Jemima, house nigger, slave, been told to go back to Africa, told to straighten my nappy hair, called a puta negra, it's black bitch. That I should be deported, and even worse, I've had threats against my life and my family's lives. These remarks come only from the so-called tolerant left, who preach that they want diversity. To be clear, this did not happen because I'm Black, or because I'm Latina, or because I'm a woman. It happened because I'm openly conservative. Hollywood is a monopoly right now. There are 6 major studios, and none, to my knowledge, are committed to diversity of thought. The big 6 are comprised of motion picture conglomerates 20th Century Fox, Paramount Pictures, Warner Brothers, Universal Pictures, Columbia Pictures, and Walt Disney Studios. And they account for over 83% of the North American market share, bringing in billions of dollars of revenue each year. What happened to me is discrimination. They don't like pro-Trumpers, pro-America, pro-life, or pro-God. They want to shut down, keep out, and crush any type of diversity because it makes them uncomfortable. They're taking that discomfort and actively, openly discriminating against people in the workplace. This hearing is meaningless and benign if it doesn't also address the active canceling of diverse voices going on right now. Yes, we need racial and ethnic diversity, and representation matters. But diversity is not only about color, gender, or how able-bodied someone is or isn't. We need to stop the discrimination against political affiliation. It's dangerous, it's destructive, it's grounded in emotion and fear, not facts. Just as we have protected classes in our country under federal law for race, color, national origin, religion, sex, age, sexuality, and disability, it's time to include political affiliations. Congress has an opportunity to be a watchdog and to set the tone. I'm an American first and foremost. I'm proud of our country, and I want to see it thrive. I want to see it protected for future generations as well. I implore Congress to act now by expanding the Civil Rights Act of 1964 to include political affiliation as a protected class. Media companies that agree in writing not to discriminate based on political leanings could be offered certain advantages, such as tax breaks. This is about protecting all Americans, no matter who they are, where they live, or what kind of work they do, and no matter how loud or quiet their voices are. The First Amendment gives us the freedom of association. I strongly believe that that includes the right to freely associate with the political party of one's choosing. Political bigotry is silencing the voices of Americans. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Whitlock.
Good afternoon. I'd like to begin by thanking Representative Jim Jordan and his staff for the opportunity to speak today on a topic central to my life's work and mission, diversity in the media. My name is Jason Whitlock. I'm a partner and content creator at Outkick.com, a media platform with the mission of creating a fearless culture in support of sports, masculinity, and free speech. Before taking an ownership stake at Outkick, I was a well-known sports columnist at the Kansas City Star and a personality and host at ESPN and Fox Sports. My written work has also been published at Playboy Magazine, the Huffington Post, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and at Fox News. In the last decade, I was involved in a journalism project, ESPN's The Undefeated, and a television project, Fox Sports' talk show, Speak for Yourself, designed to elevate, develop, and support Black content creators. Today's topic is not an issue I paid lip service to, I've lived it. I'm humbled and honored to have a voice worthy of being heard before this audience at this time in American history. Thomas Jefferson rightly argued that he would rather have newspapers without government than government without newspapers. Jefferson made clear in our Declaration of Independence that he believed in the power of self-evident truth, and he knew that journalism was a primary tool to make truth self-evident. A journalistic search for truth forced America to deal with the founding principle Jefferson spelled out. All men are created equal and endowed by their creator unalienable rights. Today, across this country, we hear protesters, rioters, and anarchists in our streets chanting, "No justice, no peace." They say they are doing this on behalf of Black lives. They have aligned justice with the threat of violence. Justice's true ally is truth, not war. Truth precedes justice. No truth, no justice. The racial justice that so many people say they're clamoring for cannot be won absent of truth. The healthy diversity that so many people say they want reflected in the media cannot be built on false narratives and outright lies. We are here today to discuss diversity and its ability to make our union more perfect. We can't get there without first discussing our abandonment of truth. No truth, no justice. What is standing in the way of truth and therefore standing in the way of holistic diversity? Big tech and Silicon Valley's hijacking of journalism. Google, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube made race clickbait the gold standard of American journalism. They are the stewards of fake news. When I graduated from Ball State University in 1990, the journalism industry catered to New York liberalism. 30 years later, the industry caters to Northern California radicalism and groupthink. Producing work that triggers algorithms that lead to likes, retweets, and follows is the mandate enforced by media executives. Social media has transformed the mainstream media, turning seekers of truth into seekers of influence. It's had the same impact on athletes. They are no longer role models. They're influence peddlers. LeBron James, a basketball prodigy with more than 80 million social media followers, has more influence over news coverage than any single journalist. He is our Walter Cronkite. Colin Kaepernick and athletes across professional sports have forced the NFL and NBA to promote the false narrative that there is a pandemic of police brutality sweeping America's Black communities. Facts do not support this narrative. I say that having lost a cousin that I helped raise to what me and my family believe was an abuse of force by law enforcement in 2012. The outrage and pain that so many claim they feel over Breonna Taylor's tragic death in Louisville, I know firsthand. A picture of my cousin sits in my living room. Every day I look at Anton Butler's face. Indianapolis sheriffs tasered him to death in the rain. There will be no justice for my cousin or anyone until the American media refocuses on a search for truth. And the truth is, as it relates to the mainstream media, the diversity we're lacking right now isn't racial. We lack the resolve to follow the truth wherever it leads. Big tech eliminated the search for truth. Big tech installed athletes, celebrities, and rigged algorithms as journalists. The media has always leaned left. It's the disregard for truth that is killing America, though. Slapping Black faces on Silicon Valley lies won't improve America. No truth, no justice.
Thank you, Mr. Whitlock. I want to note that we are in the middle of a long series of votes on the floor. We wanted to start the hearing on time to respect the time of our witnesses, but I and the other members will be filtering in and out so that we can vote. Please do not take any offense if you see some of our members leaving the room. And we'll call on Dr. Smith now.
Mr. Chairman and members of the House Judiciary Committee. Since 2005, I've conducted more than 50 studies on diversity and inclusion on screen and behind the camera in entertainment. Much of my work has focused on identity groups that have been historically marginalized in the industry. Using this body of research, I will illuminate here the exclusion of the BIPOC community in fictional films, whereas my written remarks include TV and streaming content. Three major claims can be made about the BIPOC community in film. First, progress has been paltry for BIPOC characters in feature films. Across 1,300 top films from 2007 to 2019, only 17% of all leads and co-leads were from underrepresented racial ethnic groups. To illuminate the disconnect between Hollywood films and reality, only 2 movies depicted a Hispanic or Latino lead in 2019, despite the fact that 18.5% of the US population is Hispanic Latino, as are 21% of moviegoers. Moving from leading characters to speaking characters, only 34% of all speaking characters across the 100 top movies of 2019 were from an underrepresented racial ethnic group. However, no meaningful change has been observed in the percentage of Black, Latino, or Asian characters on screen since 2007. The epidemic of invisibility on screen, particularly for women of color, is problematic. Across 100 movies last year, a full 33 erased Black girls and women, 55 deleted Asian females, 71 movies were devoid of Hispanic Latinas, 92 excised Middle Eastern, North African girls and women. Indigenous females were virtually missing from every top movie. And to illustrate the breadth of exclusionary casting practices, 598 of the top 600 movies across the last 6 years did not show a single transgender woman of color on screen. Besides invisibility, far too many roles played by Black, Latino, Asian, or MENA actors still focus on crime and violence. This can perpetuate stereotyping, particularly among those who have little direct experience with individuals from these groups. The reason for these trends becomes apparent once you look behind the camera. The second major claim is that few BIPOC directors helm top films. Across 1,300 movies, people of color filled only 14% of all directing jobs, and the vast majority of these jobs were held by BIPOC men. Only 13 women of color have worked as directors across 1,300 films. This translates into a ratio of 92 white male directors to every 1 woman of color. Why is inclusion behind the camera so important? Because BIPOC directors are more likely than their white counterparts to tell stories that feature underrepresented actors on screen, and BIPOC crew are hired below the line. The third claim is that mythologizing drives hiring practices. My qualitative work has shown that industry decision makers perceive that BIPOC talent and stories are not a box office draw. However, this myth is so far from reality. When a variety of production, distribution, and exhibition factors were statistically controlled across 1,200 movies, the underrepresented status of leads and co-leads was positively associated with box office revenue in the US. What does this mean? BIPOC leads sell. Internationally, the underrepresented status of leads was not associated with box office performance, suggesting that international audiences are drawn to good stories with white or BIPOC protagonists. There are real consequences to this industry mythologizing. Production budgets and marketing resources for films starring BIPOC leads are lower than those for white leads. Films starring women of color are particularly disadvantaged in terms of resource allocation. These results, along with the reality that underrepresented audiences buy 46% of the tickets at the box office, demonstrate that biases detrimentally impact the lives and careers of BIPOC creatives. So given these claims, what can be done? Entertainment companies must create and adopt inclusion policies immediately, setting target inclusion goals, using objective and quantifiable criteria to eliminate bias in hiring, and enacting these policies throughout their entire supply chain. These policies must be transparent so that consumers and stakeholders can hold them publicly accountable. Government intervention in the form of tax incentives that reward inclusion, not just count it, are one way to improve participation of BIPOC communities in the production process. Last, providing increased governmental funding for storytelling is a crucial way to change the status quo. These and other solutions will ensure that qualified and talented individuals from all backgrounds receive opportunities and access throughout the entire entertainment industry. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we'll hear from Karen Temple. Thank you, Chairman Nadler, Ranking Member Jordan, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to testify on behalf of the Motion Picture Association and our member studios on the important issue of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the motion picture and television industry. Although I just recently joined the MPA as Global General Counsel, I have worked in and with the entertainment industry for most of my legal career. So the issue before the committee is not just an abstract position for me. It is one that I care about deeply and personally as an African-American woman, mother, American citizen, and a human being. I grew up at a time when there were no movie fairy tale princesses who looked like me, no leading franchise superheroes, no kids' TV series that reflected my reality. So I'm not here to sugarcoat things for you today. While our industry has made some significant progress, and I will highlight many of those initiatives for you, let me be clear. The entertainment industry still has a long way to go before we reflect the true diversity of this country, both in front of and behind the camera. From the top executives and A-list actors to writers and producers on down to below the line crew, our industry and the stories we tell often do not represent the full spectrum of American society. That must change. The first step to actually solving any problem is to acknowledge and own it. So I readily concede that there is a problem of diversity and inclusion in Hollywood. But today, I'd like to focus on how we and our member studios have mobilized to fix it. We at the MPA are committed to great storytelling that reflects the viewpoints and experiences of all creators and audiences, which is why we are working hard with our member studios to collectively address diversity, gender parity, authentic cultural representation, and pipeline recruitment opportunities from underrepresented communities in our industry. By establishing programs that promote a diverse talent pipeline, creating new partnerships, and sharing what we learn, we are leading by example. 8 years ago, we established our own diversity, equity, and inclusion program because our members proactively supported the MPA, playing a constructive role in making sure our industry is open and welcoming to people of all backgrounds. We're proud of our track record since. Through our DE&I program, we have supported increasingly robust efforts by the industry to enhance the diversity of the creative pipeline, including via outreach to film schools and groups representing African American, Latinx, Asian American and Pacific Islander, Native American, women, and LGBTQ creators. We're grateful for the opportunity to partner with many such organizations, including the Entertainment Industry College Outreach Program, the Georgia Latino Film Alliance, and the Ghetto Film School, a nonprofit whose groundbreaking roster program trains 4,000 aspiring young creators annually for careers in creative industries, the vast majority of which are from underrepresented groups. And most recently, MPA was proud to announce a partnership with the Native American Media Alliance focused on promoting Native American writers in the entertainment industry. We also collaborate with many of the leading multicultural creative organizations and film festivals, including the American Black Film Festival, the Georgia Latino Film Festival, and the New York Latino Film Festival. Beginning in January of 2019, we also proactively reached out to the Tri-Caucus to educate members about MPAs and our member studios' efforts, and to foster opportunities for Congress to hear directly from multicultural creator organizations working on the front lines of fostering change. Indeed, we've initiated many such important dialogues both in Los Angeles and Washington, D.C., and continue to do so despite COVID-19. But of course, what matters most is what our member studios are doing in this area. I am gratified that today there are movie fairy tale princesses that look like girls in my community, television shows that feature dynamic, strong, Black, Asian, and Hispanic girls, and movies with Black superheroes that touch the world. We're proud that each studio in the MPA has its own robust corporate policies, senior level diversity and inclusion focused personnel, and other programs. Our members have established a large number of mentorship and other programs specifically designed to give members of underrepresented groups the necessary training and relationship building necessary to gain a foothold in the industry. I'll refer you to my written testimony for most of the details, but I did want to just mention 2 examples. Sony Pictures Diverse Directors Program, which is now in its 7th year, has enabled the studio to identify emerging women and directors of color and has resulted in numerous program alums actively directing for Sony Pictures and throughout the industry. The Walt Disney Company has many programs and policies to address these issues, including the U.S. Hispanic Initiative, a company-wide effort focused on growing relevancy to and engagement with U.S. Hispanic, and a long-standing creative talent development program to diversify the creative pipeline that have helped launch the careers of many industry professionals, including Peter Murrieta and Zetna Fuentes. I want to thank the committee for the opportunity to be part of the discussion on these important issues, and we remain committed to working with you until our shared goals of a fully diverse, equitable, and inclusive motion picture and television industry becomes a reality. I welcome your questions. Thank you.
Thank you to all of our witnesses. We'll now proceed under the 5-minute rule with questions, and I'll recognize Ms. Lofgren for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, and thanks to each and every one of our witnesses. You know, Hispanic Heritage Month is an appropriate time to be discussing underrepresentation in media, especially when the traditional home of the industry, California, my home, is almost 40% Hispanic, and even higher in Los Angeles, about half Hispanic, and yet that community only accounts for 3% of directors and 4% of producers. You know, like all for-profit businesses, movie and TV studios and other media companies are ultimately driven by their financial bottom line, and business decisions may be short-sighted or reflect biases. But in the end, including racial and ethnic representation should be good business given the audience. And we've had some examples mentioned here by our witnesses today. So I'm struggling to understand why this economic imperative has not been successful in moving Hollywood to into more diversity. And I'm wondering, it was so wonderful to listen to you, Mr. Olmos, about why this matters. Sitting in the movie theater, having these things go directly into your consciousness, it matters who is represented and how people understand our society, and movies play such a role in that. Talk to me about why the bottom line hasn't moved us to where we need to be. Mr. Olmos.
The bottom line comes through the understanding that they don't have to. If they put out a movie with a person that is quote unquote Latino in a secondary role, third role, we go to the theaters and we make up 32 to 37% of all the box office on opening weekend. We always put in a lot of money into the situation. I think in the future, what's happening, and what I presented, why I presented the video, is that we have to turn around and understand that we have responsibility for ourselves. The only way it's going to change is if we change. We need to have the writers, we need to have the in front of camera and behind the camera people organized and ready to go. That's why the Youth Cinema Project is way beyond anybody's imagination. Over the last 6 years, we've actually put together over 1,400 people, children, in 13 different school districts that take this program twice a week for 90 minutes with two mentors in the classroom. We are creating over 130 feature films or films by these students from 4th grade through high school, all the way through high school, every year. We produce more film than anyone. Now, I will tell you this. It'll take another 10, 15 years, but it's going to change. And when it changes, these kids, Scorsese, Coppola, all of the great directors that we've ever known did not have in the 4th grade someone mentoring them to become filmmakers and understand themselves. And we're not trying to make filmmakers, by the way. We're trying to make lifelong learners. So, go.
It was wonderful to see the film of what you're doing, and I thank you for that. It's a wonderful contribution to American society. Dr. Smith, I'm wondering if you might also jump in on the question of why the profit incentive hasn't actually moved Hollywood to where we would hope they would be.
Well, I think there's a few things that are operating, and I addressed some of them in my remarks. There's a lot of mythologizing about decision making. If you look in my written remarks, we surveyed or conducted in-depth interviews with over 20 underrepresented directors and asked them about the impediments that they face. And market forces that are politicized seems to be one of the major factors. Individuals in green lighting positions have perceptions about what sells and what doesn't sell. And resource allocation is very problematic, particularly for women of color. They're given lower production costs, lower marketing budgets. Their films are released in fewer theaters, and so they have less support for their films to do as well as their counterparts. Some of this is true with films led by men of color as well. So that adage of you have to work twice as hard to get half as far is actually quite true. Yet our economic reality of the data and the analyses that we did on 1,200 films suggests that there is a viable market for BIPOC leads and co-leads. So the executive ranks feature very few people of color. There are few directors of color to ensure that their stories are being told. And without a change in how the industry hires and crews up, this inequality will keep perpetuating over time.
Well, that's why I was focusing on directors and producers. Obviously, there's an issue throughout the industry. My time has expired. Before I yield back, I had questions for Karen Temple, but I do want to just thank her for her service to our country when she was in the copyright office. You've moved on to, bigger fields, but we do appreciate the work that you did there. And thank you so much for your service. And I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Mr. Biggs for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Vila, it's good to see you again. Thanks for being here today. Thanks to all the witnesses for being here today. Ms. Vila, I really want to pay tribute to you. Thank you for your advocacy for the unborn.
Thank you.
Talk to us about the negative backlash that you've received from Hollywood for supporting President Trump, his pro-life policies, and defunding organizations like Planned Parenthood, please.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Being a proud pro-life woman, having given a child up for adoption and having experienced the pressure of the nurse who gave me the pregnancy test to abort my child when I was 20 years old was incredibly traumatic. There is a pressurization for women, especially women of color, to get an abortion no matter what. There is nothing talked about saying, you are strong, you are proud, you are Latina, you are Black, you can raise a baby, or you can choose adoption. And I would rather our tax dollars go to adoption than abortion. But as far as my attacks, there have been rape threats and death threats on my life simply for being pro-life. And in Hollywood, it is something that is the unspoken secret that you cannot celebrate life, you cannot celebrate God, you cannot say, I'm a proud pro-life Christian in Hollywood, and achieve the same success that many A-listers do. In fact, many actresses brag about on the way up to their golden statuettes that they gave their children up so that they could achieve their dreams. And as someone who hopes to become a mother one day, I implore all mothers and fathers to not co-sign this narrative. It's incredibly dangerous to young girls to tell them, you can do anything you want except have a career and also be a mother. Abortion is not the option. Choosing life is the most important fight, and I'm proud that our president approves of this and is defunding Planned Parenthood. And Hollywood needs to open up and stop discrimination against pro-life women and men, because if we are truly going to talk about diversity and supporting women, we need to talk about the unborn, the most vulnerable.
Thank you for your testimony. Thank you for speaking out. Mr. Whitlock, you've written extensively about Black Lives Matter and how they've corrupted the minds of many young athletes. And you recently wrote that boycotting sports leagues for supporting BLM would be ineffective in causing change. You go on to state that your, quote, alternative to boycotting major league sports is a holistic approach of educating the athletes on what they're actually supporting, BLM is Marxist, anti-religion, anti-nuclear family, and racially divisive, close quote. Big sports media companies tend to drive home the BLM narrative on behalf of athletes. Can you elaborate on how you're going about educating athletes on BLM, please?
Yeah, I'm just trying to write about it on Outkick and talk about it on our YouTube page because I believe many of the athletes, I know many athletes, they have Christian values. They were raised in Christian homes. And I don't think they truly understand Marxism. I don't think they know that the women who founded Black Lives Matter are trained Marxists. I don't think they realize that if you went to Black Lives Matter's own webpage, the what we believe section of their webpage was just an expression of Marxist theory. And so, and they've scrubbed some of that what we believe because there's been a lot of pushback. Athletes over in Europe, the European soccer leagues, they're backing away from Black Lives Matter because they realize how divisive it is, how anti-Western civilization it is. And so, you know, I used to be, I was a college athlete. That's how I made it from poverty to a good life. Was I got a football scholarship. I don't want to demean athletes in any way, but a lot of times when you're a great athlete, you work on developing your body because it's a smart thing to do. There's a big payday if you do it. And there's some things that you kind of skip over. And I can say that when I was in my 20s, there were a lot of things I didn't understand. And I think a lot of these athletes, when you say the word Marxism, I don't think they understand the threat of Karl Marx and his political theory, the threat it poses to Christian values, the threat it poses to people that believe in a nuclear family. And so I'm just trying to point these things out to athletes, trying to educate them on, you know, what Black Lives Matter's real agenda is. And I legitimately think that Black Lives Matter is one of the most racist organizations we've ever seen in the history of America. Bigots love Marxism. And Marxism it's a great marketing scheme, Black Lives Matter. It's a great slogan. But if you look at the truth of what it truly represents and the agenda it's working towards, it will lead to the destruction, not just of America, but in particular, Black America. The things that allowed us to overcome slavery and make it to where we had a president elected twice in Barack Obama, the things that allowed us this incredible journey, our faith, is under attack through BLM. As I listen to Joy Villa talk about Hollywood, I lived in Los Angeles for a decade. It is hostile towards Christian values. We've just gone way too secular, and this thing is driven by Silicon Valley and their social media apps. Twitter has got to be the most secular place on earth. If you express any type of religious faith, you're ostracized and criticized. So I just want to take a long-term approach and just try to engage athletes in a positive way and explain to them what the organization truly represents and hope that some of them wake up.
Thank you. The gentleman's time has expired.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Wheeler.
Next, the chair will recognize a longstanding leader in diversity issues, the gentlewoman from Texas.
Madam Chair, thank you so very much. And let me thank Mr. Nadler and Mr. Jordan for providing us with such a rich diversity of thought. That is clearly, I think, an important element of this. And I'm delighted that the witnesses who are of varying opinions have had their opportunity to raise their voices. I do want to take just a moment and say that the young people that I've worked with in my own constituency, Black Lives Matter, are true young Americans. They're college students. They're empowered young athletes, brilliant. They are thoughtful. They love this country. And they just want to see a life led by young people, maybe less fortunate than themselves, that would be in a nation that reimagines policing and has a just response to justice for all. I've had the privilege of working with them since the tragedy of the killing of Trayvon Martin. I know his mother to be a patriot, and the mothers of the movement, from Eric Garner to Tamir Rice to the mother of Michael Brown, and now as we watch the tragedies that have occurred just recently with Breonna Taylor, and of course, George Floyd and Jacob Blake. I also think it is important to note that yesterday, a coalition of players, athletes, pro ball of various leagues endorsed H.R. 40, the Commission to Study and Develop Reparation Proposals. Young men recognizing the history of not only their people, but their neighborhoods, thoughtful young men. So let me indicate, first of all, to Erica Alexander, and then to Mr. Kim, if I can quickly, and speak to how hurtful the decades have been, because you're not decades, but you are a historian, when people of color were blackballed for several reasons, their looks, their hair, but also the studios were not interested because they didn't make money. Can you answer that question? I have a question for Mr. Kim, and I'm going to try to get in one of these outstanding, all of you are outstanding actors, but this great historian and actor, Edward Olmos. Ms. Alexander.
Yes, ma'am.
Did you hear the
Thank you for, could you please say that question again?
How is the question of race, your looks, your hair, and studios' lack of interest because of money, meaning these are not profitable films, impacted Black artists?
It's impacted them greatly. It's limited their, not only their earning power, but the potential for progress. You know, when we talk about diversity, we really should be saying racial justice, because that's exactly what it is. Inside of all these issues, inside of people who I may not even agree with, we're talking about expanding the human experience. And when you stop any one person for the way they look, for the way they present, you're stopping this, not only the human story, you're stopping the American story, which is one of greatness and power because of e pluribus unum, for many one. So once we start telling the story of the people who are most marginalized, we expand the vision of ourselves, and more importantly, we innovate inside of it. And since our best and most powerful export is creativity and culture, we will know that when we're doing that, we limit the power of the United States, and that's how important it is. And the years that they've done that has stopped the United States from being its most powerful self.
Mr. Almos and Mr. Thank you so very much, Mr. Almos and Mr. Kim. I'm going to ask you this, so hopefully you'll get in your comments. Mr. Almos, culture reflects the nation reflects culture. What someone says, politics is intertwined, public service, public leaders' words mean something. What does it mean when you have the leading officer in the nation, the president, describe Latinx people as drug dealers? Mr. Kim, what does it mean when COVID-19 that has hit minorities harder than any other population is described as the China virus for culture, for people understanding, which is what art is all about, making sure people understand difference or tell stories differently, whether it's fiction or not. Mr. Olmos, your comments, please.
It's devastating to my children, to myself, to people of Latino descent. It is only can be said that anyone that speaks like this about another culture has the right to do that in this country, but they don't have the right to tell lies. And that's what's happening. Not every single person, they encompass so much. I'm not going to say that we don't have people that are doing things that are against the law, but so are all the cultures. What makes me sad is that we haven't gotten to the point of where we understand who we are as people. What we got to understand is that there's only one race, the human race. That's it. There's no African or indigenous or Asian or Latino or Caucasian race. There's only one race, the human race. And inside of that, there are cultures. But you cannot tell me that the English look like or act or feel like the Irish.
I'm sorry, Mr. Olmos.
you.
The gentlewoman's time has expired. Mr. Kim, could you answer very, very briefly?
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Mr.
Sure.
Kim.
I will say that when the leader of our country refers to a virus as as coming from a particular country. He may have his own reasons for doing that are political and a statement against maybe the leadership of that country. But the virus does have a scientific name, and that is COVID-19. And when the ramifications of the words he uses not only affects Chinese people, but Chinese Americans and all Asian Americans to the tune of 2,800 hate crimes or acts of violence against them in several months, that's something that needs to get examined because words do matter. And so, and our leadership sets the tone.
Thank you. That means diversity is crucial in the arts. Thank you so very much, Madam Chair, for your courtesy. I yield back.
Thank you. The gentlewoman from Arizona is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And I want to thank all of the people that are testifying. And I appreciate your success and applaud you for your successes. First of all, I want to say that I agree all people should be treated equally and they should not be discriminated against. And so I call on my Democratic colleagues and some of the testifiers to stand up for people that have diversity in thought as well. As we've heard from Joy Villa today, that she has been discriminated against because of her beliefs, because she is pro-life, because she supports Donald Trump. And I hope that you will realize and think about it, that the discrimination that you have witnessed and you have experienced because of your race or sex that you have told us about, I hope you realize the same thing is happening about people's beliefs. For instance, I'm a pro-life woman, and I stood up against government funding of abortions. And National Planned Parenthood put my phone number, my home phone number out for the whole world to see. And I got the most vile calls, people telling me I should stick things in different places that you don't want to know. This is not right. So I agree with you. We should not discriminate. But please tell your co-workers, tell your co-producers, tell your other people, you should not discriminate based on what people believe. There is too much cancel culture going on right now. People are afraid, workers are afraid to speak up for fear they are going to get fired. This is happening in all different sectors. So I do not have questions today, but I want you to think about this. When you have seen discrimination because of race, because of sex, or you have experienced it, please know that people right now are being discriminated against because of what they believe. There's an instance right in Arizona State University. I'm from Arizona. There is a young woman who is a student employee who is the manager of a student radio station. All she did was retweet out something. It wasn't even bad. And all of a sudden she's fired. This is outrageous. And so I hope that you will understand that no one should be discriminated against. Not only because of not just because of their race, not just because of their sex, but also because of what we believe. Because our country was founded on people having different opinions. And if we squelch the opinion of one side just because we don't agree with them, the future of our nation is at risk. And Mr. Kim, the reason that people voted against the resolution that you were talking about was because inserted in that was a political attack specifically designed against the President of the United States. I have a large Asian American community in my district, and I totally appreciate them. And I try to respect all people, no matter what their race, no matter what their sex, and certainly no matter what they believe. So thank you all for testifying. Please take my words to heart. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you. The chair recognizes Mr. Deutsch for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Madam Chairman, there are certain fundamentals that underlie everything that we do here in Congress. We have a shared faith in our institutions, even when we examine and challenge them. We have a shared tradition of defending the right to vote, even when we disagree on how best to accomplish that. And we have a shared trust that there will be a peaceful transition of power, regardless of whether we like the outcome of an election. President Trump's comments yesterday, his inability to acknowledge that there will be a peaceful transition of power, undercut these shared truths. We cannot just continue going about this committee's business or allow any person to undermine the bedrock of our democracy, that free and fair elections determine our government and our leaders. So I would ask this committee, I would ask my colleagues, that we join together to protect our democracy, to protect our citizens and their right to vote, and to protect America. Now, yesterday, we learned that no one will be charged in the death of Breonna Taylor. No charges for an officer blindly firing into Breonna Taylor's apartment, killing her. And that's because that's how the system that we have works. The racism that denies Breonna Taylor justice is baked in. That is how Kimberly Crenshaw, Executive Director of the African American Policy Forum, put it yesterday. I quote her. If we thought the problem and the solution to the tragedy of Breonna Taylor was simply prosecuting these cops, then we're not understanding the broader systemic conditions that allow for the kind of policing that disproportionately imperils Black Americans, which is to say, we've got a lot of work to do. This committee has a lot of work to do. Our government, law enforcement agencies, courts, schools, workplaces, and yes, our entertainment and media too, have a lot of work to do to address those systemic conditions that deny Breonna Taylor justice and that deny us all justice as a result. Madam Chairman, I'd like to enter into the record this Washington Post article entitled, Allegations of Racism Have Marked Trump's Presidency and Become Key Issue as Election Nears.
Without objection.
Thank you. I want to thank all of the witnesses for taking the time to share their experiences with us. Diversity and representation in media matters. The stories that we tell and the people we see telling them are connected to how we see people in our daily lives. Ms. Temple, I appreciate your sharing your own experiences and your proactive agreement that more needs to be done by your industry in this regard. And I know that MPA and others in the industry have begun the process of developing a more diverse pool of talent in front of and behind the camera. The problem is by no means limited to the media world. We see a shocking lack of women and people of color in boardrooms across all sectors. But why we are here focusing specifically on media is the outsized power that film and television have in shaping our culture, and even more fundamentally, our views about what doctors look like, what lawyers look like, what a fairy tale princess or superhero looks like, and yes, what criminals look like. Mr. Olmos, I can't help but feel that you've been sounding the alarm on criminal justice reform, and especially the intersection of criminal justice reform and minority representation, for decades, and it is finally getting the attention that it deserves. And as a longtime activist on criminal justice reform issues and building off your work, what are some of the societal changes that are leading to the disproportionate numbers of minorities in our criminal justice system, our jails, and our prisons?
Education. Education and understanding of our community as to what causes this action to happen. Now, basically, we are all able to understand that there are a lot of people in jail, but why is it so disproportionate? Why is that happening? That's always been said, and it is not the answer that illuminates, it's the question. And the question always is that people have a really difficult time with people of color. They won't do the things that they will do for non-people of color. They won't educate them. They won't allow them the right to vote even. We have the right to vote, and yet we're getting slammed right now in the minority areas with the whole situation with the President of the United States understanding of using mail-in ballots. We have a difficulty in criminal law We have a difficulty in the way that they use criminal law. The way we use criminal law is different for the colored people versus the white people. And I got to tell you right now, it's a disaster.
Thank you, Mr. Olmos. Thanks to our witnesses, and thank you, Madam Chairman. I yield back.
Yes, the chair recognizes Mr. Jordan for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Whitlock, do we have a functioning First Amendment when 62% of Americans feel like they can't express themselves freely?
Absolutely not. And I appreciate you not asking me to make a negative comment about President Trump, who's not a part of the media. You guys called a meeting to discuss the media, and somehow you should have just asked us to pre-record negative comments about President Trump, and then we could actually talk about the topics you've asked our time to speak about, the media. I'm sorry, Mr. Jordan, go ahead.
No. I well said. Do you have a free speech rights when only one side is allowed to talk, which is exactly what the cancel culture mob is doing today?
Absolutely not. I'm gonna go on another rant. I would wish we could talk about big tech's takeover of free speech.
Yep.
Silicon Valley is in control of America. It's in control of the American media. There's only one strain of thought allowed. If you do not agree with Silicon Valley and Northern California's radical point of view, they will cancel you and silence you on their social media apps, and in any other way possible, try to smear your character. I've been through the whole cancel culture thing driven by Silicon Valley and the political activists on the left. This whole thing, I gotta be honest with you, Mr. Jordan, I'm glad you invited me, but it's frustrating. My parents have always been mad at me because I, to be quite honest, I refuse to vote. I don't like politicians. And this experience I'm witnessing here today, people grandstanding and trying to make comments about Trump and whatever, when we're here to talk about the media, it pisses me off. It's a clown show. What's my tax dollars going for? Are we here to conduct business and get at real issues? Or are we here to just put out a commercial about an anti-Trump commercial? I don't want any parts in it. I don't participate in any of this presidential politics. Yep. I didn't have anything negative to say about Barack Obama. I don't got anything negative to say about President Trump. Let's talk about the media and too many of you guys on the payroll of big tech.
Let me ask you this. And you referenced it in those comments. Ms. Weiss, and I referenced it in my opening statement. Barry Weiss of the New York Times talked about the digital Thunderdome. If you attempt, most of Americans are afraid to do it, but if you step out and speak out against the mob, do you think that's the appropriate term, this term that she used, digital Thunderdome? And if so, have you ever been in the Thunderdome? I think you alluded to that.
I'm in it virtually every day, and Barry Weiss was 1,000% correct. She called Twitter the editor for the New York Times, and Twitter is the editor for the American media. Yep. And Twitter is a rigged algorithm that imposes a worldview that is anti-American, anti-religion, anti the values that we were funded in, anti the values that got us, that made this country the ideal human experiment, that all these people ranting and raving and complaining about America, you couldn't get them to leave America with a stick of dynamite and $1 million in cash. They would not leave. They all allege they hate America. And America is, well, it's the greatest human experiment we've ever had.
Yep.
Is it perfect?
Well said.
Absolutely not. But this, thanks for inviting me.
Let me ask you this, and I want to ask Ms. Villa this as well. Will the cancel culture mobs just stop with conservatives and Republicans, or will they come after Democrats at some point too? Ms. Villa, and then we'll go back to Mr. Whitlock if we have time.
Absolutely, and I'd like to say Rhonda Kennedy Ball is my counsel here. She's a Black woman, mother of 6. And cancel culture is an infection. They're going after everybody. They're going after Democrats. They're going after long-standing celebrities, Black, Latino, it doesn't matter. Cancel culture is a virus that is attacking every single facet. And I've heard a lot of bashing of the president here. I want to, join along with Mr. Whitlock. Why can't we stay on the topic? Why can't we talk about diversity in media rather than insulting the president? If you can't have one subject where you talk about diversity in media, when you have a Black woman and Latina woman right here in front of you and all this diversity behind us, and you still have to talk about the president. It's sad, it's pathetic, it's embarrassing, quite honestly, and I am proud to be here and say that this president has perpetrated more diversity than any other president. He's been the most pro-Black president. The First Step Act, you want to talk about disproportionate Black and brown people, and you want to talk about in criminal justice reform, not one Democrat has done anything for criminal justice reform. You want to talk about Joe Biden's character, but I'm not going to bring that up. I'm going to go back to what we're talking about here, and representation in media matters, but we must have diversity of thought. Big tech needs to be held accountable, the big studios need to be held accountable, and every single celebrity that wants to talk about only what they're doing is ignoring the fact that Black Lives Matter in the name of diversity is saying Black lives only matter, and they're killing police officers every day. That is not diversity, that's violence.
Ms. Villa, Mr. Whitlock, there were 4 members of Congress shadow banned by Twitter 2 summers ago. Any guess as to whether they were 4 Republicans? There's about the same party. Do you think they were Republicans or Democrats?
Republicans.
Yeah. Gates, Meadows, Nunes, Jordan. We know, as Mr. Whitlock said, big tech is out to get conservatives. That's why we need to be looking at Section 230, how we fix that, make sure that the platform is in fact neutral and not censoring people. When Twitter can let the Ayatollah of Iran put out a statement, say they will strike a blow against American citizens, and that's fine, but then they will censor the president's tweets, I think it proves Mr. Whitlock's point. I yield back. And I apologize to our witness. I have to run to another vote, and we're back and forth, but I'll be back later.
The gentleman yields back. I'll yield myself to ask questions. First of all, for Mr. Olmos, though it's of course not universal and strides have surely been made, it still appears that actors who are either women or people of color are too often given only supporting roles or token roles with few lines and little character development on film and TV. We want to see less of that and more leading roles. How do you think we can break down the barriers that people of color face so that actors from underrepresented groups can take center stage just as often as white male actors?
Well, first of all and foremost, the industry has to really want to do stories about minorities. Indigenous people deserve their stories being told, and we should see them and we'd love them, and they could be commercial. African Americans are doing a great job. Latinos were 20-something% of the population. We're less than 4% of the people who we see on screen. All I can say is that it's up to us. That's why we did and why we're doing the educational system. We are doing YCP for a reason. We are really training the future. Now, in 10 or 15 years, you're going to see a huge difference because the quality of the storytellers will be diverse. We're not only doing this for Latino children. These are all the children in California that are in the system right now that are getting this. They're so fortunate to be able to do this because it builds their self-esteem, self-respect, and their self-worth. It makes them collaborate, communicate, use their critical thinking and creativity. And that, to me, is the essence of how one becomes all that they can be. And I say to you and all of us, let the children get educated.
And Ms. Temple, it's good to see you again in your new role. What change can we expect to see from studios in the next 5 years to improve diversity, do you think?
Well, I think what you will see is an expansion of the positive gains that we've talked about a little bit in terms of representation both in front of and behind the camera. As I mentioned earlier in my opening remarks, there have been gains. Even the Hollywood and Diversity Report noted that there were gains in some of the major areas that they had looked at in terms of, film roles, film directors, and others participating in the industry. So those are all positive steps. Obviously, as I said earlier, those gains are not enough and more needs to be done. I think you will see an expansion because I think that this is obviously a long-term process. And there are a number of programs and initiatives that I've talked about that really did just get started over the last few years. So I think as those programs and initiatives and every single one of our companies, our member studios has those types of programs, as those programs continue to grow and expand, I think that you will see increased numbers of representation both in front of and behind the camera. And we recognize that there have been, somewhat broader gains in front of the camera than behind the camera, and you need both. And so I think you will actually see that commitment continue and expanding, and really, hopefully, the numbers expanding as well.
Thank you. Now, we're currently in the midst of a pandemic and recession that are disproportionately impacting people of color, especially Black and Latino people. Economic inequality has long disproportionately impacted people of color, and this recession could further exacerbate it. The pandemic offers television and film production companies an opportunity to reset and reassess what shows or films continue in the development pipeline. Let me ask you, Mr. Kim, what are concrete steps the industry can take to ensure that the content pipeline includes shows and film that will employ people of color in front of and behind the camera?
Thanks for the question. It's a good one. I think it's a multi-pronged approach. I happen to be the executive producer of a show called The Good Doctor on ABC. And I can tell you that one of the things that the network is actually doing is setting an aggressive set of goals for diversity in front of and behind the camera. Obviously, these kinds of goals are not specifically mandates, and they require time for them to be implemented. But I think it's important. I think it's important that those goals exist from the most powerful places, the distributors. I think it's also important that content creators are very aware of the kinds of projects that we're making with an eye toward representing the world we'd like to see. And I also think what's really important is to create a pipeline of writers, actors, and directors, the way that Mr. Olmos is doing, to foster the next generation of people who will be sitting in those seats of power. So it's a number of different things, and COVID in some ways has accelerated trends that are already existing in the industry, such as the trend toward streaming and the trend toward different kinds of storytelling. So it's important to listen to what's going on in society as well as try and lead it.
Well, thank you. Ms. Alexander, can you add anything to that as to what concrete steps the industry can take?
Yes, sir. I think that we need to make sure that the power of the purse to make production companies more racially diverse and their teams should be used. And we should definitely work on training programs. And also, there are very few people who are on these teams that are able to have hiring authority. So to make sure that we can get writers and directors and producers and casting directors that usually have that type of power and empowered. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Cicilline.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to first thank my friend and colleague from Florida, Mr. Deutsch, for raising a very important issue that I think everyone has a responsibility to speak to directly. The president yesterday refused to say that he would accept the results of the election if he lost and accept the peaceful transfer of power. And worse than that, he said, the problem is ballots. Oh, too many ballots. Of course, ballots and the right to vote are the cornerstone of our democracy and the most powerful expression of that democracy. And it was a sad day to hear the president say that he would not accept a peaceful transition of power. The problem was people were going to vote, and to hear so much silence on the other side of the aisle. I also want to say that before I get to my first question, I think the truth matters. Mr. Whitlock said, oh, Black Lives Matter has on its website, it's a Marxist organization. So let me be clear. Black Lives Matter, and I'm reading from the website, was founded in 2013 in response to the acquittal of Trayvon Martin's murderer. It is an organization whose mission is to eradicate white supremacy and build local power to intervene in violence inflicted on Black communities. So it's very clear. That's not Marxist ideology. That, I hope, is American ideology. That is to stand up against white supremacy and to empower communities. So my first question is, Dr. Smith, you've done an enormous amount of research about the importance of people seeing themselves in characters both on the small and big screen. Why is that important? And your research that I've reviewed in your written testimony shows that disproportionately, communities of color, particularly Blacks and Latinos, are depicted, the number one category is criminal. And what's the impact of that?
Well, I think the research is really clear, particularly when individuals lack direct experience. The media can play a notable role in shaping attitudes, perceptions, and beliefs about different groups. There's decades of research to show that the mass media can play an independent or interactive role when it comes to media effects. And when it comes to identity, it can shape a whole series of different outcomes. And I believe it was Mr. Olmos who referred to self-esteem being one of the key indicators. I want to take this moment to illustrate that while a lot of the ideas and commentary here are very interesting to listen to, the decision-making capabilities of who to hire in Hollywood has prevented for decades women, people of color, member of the LGBTQ community, and people with disabilities from access and opportunity on screen and behind the camera. The pipeline is there. The pipeline is there. We need resources to fund motion pictures and content for people of color behind the camera to tell their stories. Because if they are simply given the opportunity to tell their stories like their white male counterparts, the stories will be there and people will see themselves reflected in nuanced, authentic, and compelling ways. But we don't see that. We know that people are submitting to the Sundance Film Festivals from a whole series of different backgrounds. Let's fund the Sundance Institute to make sure that those storytellers, because there's a relationship between presenting your film at Sundance and having a film into top grossing 100 best pictures.
Thank you,
top
Dr.
grossing
Smith.
pictures,
I want to try to get in one
yeah.
more question, but thank you, Dr. Smith. Mr. De Kim, thank you for changing your mind and agreeing to testify. Your testimony was compelling and important, and I too was deeply saddened by the fact that that vote against that resolution was not unanimous, and it just evidences that we have a lot of work to do. What I'd like to ask you to address is what can we do and what can we incentivize within your industry to help ensure that there's better representation in front of the camera and behind the camera for communities of color, women, LGBTQ individuals, Indigenous people, because we understand from the research what the absence of their representation means, not just for those communities, but for the entire country and the world.
So when you say we, thank
Congress.
you, Representative.
Congress and you in the industry.
You and me? No, I think it's a great question because one thing I don't want to dismiss or is this idea of being excellent at your craft. And one of the things about diversity is that no one is asking to give opportunities that are not earned. And so, we talk about ways that the system can help increase diversity, but what's also important is the way that we can help ourselves. We must be the best we can be at what we choose to do, whether it's acting, writing, and directing, anything in the arts. And I think the way that Congress can help us is one, through hearings such as this, because I think it's important to hear the perspectives of people like everyone on this panel, both left and right. And I think what they say builds character is thoughts that lead to words, that lead to actions, that lead to habits, that lead to character. What we're doing here today is we're planting new thoughts. We're planting seeds that we hope will blossom into a new way of thinking and building character. And to bring it back to how it relates to media is the way to implant thoughts. Just as Mr. Olmos said, when we first saw Jaws, we were terrified of sharks. I was afraid to go into my bathtub after I saw Jaws. And when we were young playing cowboys and Indians, how many of us thought that the Indians were the bad guys? And that's because we were taught through all of the cowboy westerns that was the way it was supposed to be. How many of us thought that when we first saw Bruce Lee, that all Asian American people knew Kung Fu? So these are the ways that talking about these things and highlighting these issues affect the way we think. And I think to answer your question more succinctly, when we talk about pipelines, when we talk about people in positions of power, that's you. I mean, look at this room. You are the people who affect change in this country as much as anyone else. And so when we see people like yourself being influenced and understanding the issue in new ways, that is already a way that we can change things. So there are a number of ways that you and I and all of us in this room can help with progress.
Thank you so
Time of the
much.
gentleman has expired.
I thought he was going to make reference to my being a member of the Screen Actors Guild, Mr. Chairman. I am, when you talked about the craft,
Ms. Jayapal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. It must be very nice to be able to look at the screen or to go to a movie and see yourself reflected in every show, to know that whatever you choose to do, you'll get the same opportunity, to know that our stories are reflected when we switch on that TV or go to the movies. I don't understand how a conversation about diversity and appropriate representation in the media has turned into a conversation about the cancel culture. When I was growing up in India and Indonesia, we only used to get one American television show a day on our TV. And our family would rush to see those shows. And I loved them all, but I noticed something. There was only one of those shows that actually had any actors that were people of color. And it was Hawaii Five-0, the original one, that is. And it quickly became our favorite show. And I've stayed a fan, Mr. Kim, with this version as well. Watching it sometimes, I will admit, as my guilty pleasure when I'm supposed to be doing other things. Our stories matter, because what we see on the screen creates the landscape for our society. They tell young people what it's possible for them to have, in the same way that having more women and people of color in Congress matters. And they help to shape our views, positive and negative. That's why Ava DuVernay's When They See Us, or Pose, or even Atypical, which tells the story of a teenager with autism, matter. After the September 11th attacks, I founded and led the largest immigrant rights organization in Washington state. And we initially started our work responding to the backlash, hate crimes, and discrimination against Muslims, Arab Americans, East Africans, and South Asians. The threat of hate violence after 9/11 was paralyzing for our communities. And it did not help that Hollywood too often presented Muslims as terrorists. And frankly, we're still fighting stereotypes against our community, a fight that is made far more difficult when we can't tell our own stories and people can't see us in the media as the beautiful, complex, and full people that we are. So, Ms. Smith, in the 19 years since the September 11th attacks, we've seen Hollywood start to include Muslims and Sikhs and South Asians in stories, but often as side characters and often as terrorists, not as regular people. And meanwhile, assaults and hate crimes against Muslims have been on the rise since 2001, peaking in 2016 with 127 anti-Muslim assaults. Is there a connection here between the way a community is portrayed on the screen and how they're seen and treated in their own communities?
I think when you look at the research, definitely there's an impact that the media can play on shaping the attitudes, perceptions, and the beliefs of different groups, particularly in the absence of direct contact with members of that community. And this is why in my written testimony, we do reference the negative stereotypes that are far too often the series of different groups, whether it's based on race, ethnicity, LGBTQ, or faith. When they're conjoined with images of crime and violence, there can be detrimental and harmful effects. I'm happy to report that we are actually looking into Muslim representation at the Annenberg Inclusion Initiative, and I would love to follow up with you in the future about the results of that investigation and the efforts that we're pursuing in that vein.
Wonderful. And just very quickly, because I have another question for Mr. Kim, I know that your institute performed an analysis on race, gender, and ethnicity of directors for the top 10 fictional films. And among the 1,300 films, you found only 3% of directors were Asian, and that included only 2 Asian women directors. Quickly, why is the director role so crucial to the work to diversify the industry?
More leads more leads on screen that are from racial ethnic groups, more speaking characters from racial ethnic groups, more likely to hire below the line crew that are from diverse backgrounds. And if the audience is over 45% people of color, it connects with audiences not only in the United States, but communicates an image globally about the world in which we live. And so the director identity as the top leadership position in or on a great production team really matters for all of those hiring positions being associated with increases, particularly for marginalized communities.
Thank you so much. Mr. Kim, you know I'm a fan. You talked about in your testimony that media is a value delivery system. Can you speak to that a little bit more, what it means to be a groundbreaking bilingual Asian actor in an industry where there were very few people who look like you and very few parts that reflect the values and real lives of Asian folks like us?
Well, thank you for the question. And I have to say, I'm a fan of yours, representatives. You're incredibly articulate, and thank you for participating. I would say that like cigarettes are a nicotine delivery system, television and film and media is also a value delivery system of sorts. We shape what is acceptable in society by what we see on television and vice versa. You know, what we see on television is a reflection of society. So they are intertwined. And so when we see that it's acceptable to put people of color in secondary roles and constantly have the white leads of every show save the day, we are subconsciously or consciously making the correlation between their abilities and what we see on screen. And so it's incredibly important that we have people of all shapes and sizes doing every different thing. It's not that people of color are asking only to be leads or only to be heroes. I think what people of color are asking for is a diversity of representation so that when we see someone who looks like you or me, we don't automatically have preconceived notions of what they can or cannot do based solely on our skin color. So I think that's really an important thing. A lot of the testimony here has focused on the fact.
The time of the gentleman has expired. Now recognize Ms. Demings, who's been a leader on media diversity for many
Thank you,
years.
Mr. Kim. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all of our witnesses for joining us today as we have this very important discussion. Because this discussion has taken so many different forms, I was a little confused at one time about what hearing I was in. For the record, I will just say that I am a Black woman. I know everybody can see that. I am a former police chief, a career law enforcement officer, and I am a Christian. And Ms. Villa, I can tell you, I don't know about anybody else. I don't care about you being a conservative. But I do care about how Black and brown people have been treated in this country for 400 years. I do care about that. I'm a Black woman. I know what discrimination feels like. I know what name calling. The first time I was called the N-word, I was 4 years old. So I can talk about this issue because I've lived it myself. And we've talked about a woman's right to choose here. We've talked about the police. We've gone into some areas that I'm not really sure why. And you know, as we talk about diversity in the entertainment field, I know that's why we're here. We also need to get to a discussion where we talk about it in the news media too. I know that will be a different hearing, but who tells the story matters because it brings different perspectives to the issue. So when the viewer, the listener, walks away, they'll have a better opinion. You know, as we talk about criminal justice, I think the problem is sometimes is that we want to start at the beginning or at the end. We want to start with the police as opposed to looking at what has transpired long before the police were ever called in the first place. We cannot just hold one system accountable in America if we're going to make a difference. We've got to hold all systems accountable that have failed us. We're not here to criticize the entertainment industry, but doggone it, we ought to be here to make it better, so that little girls and little boys like me and from Hispanic and Latino communities can have an equal opportunity to succeed, to be a part of telling that story. And Dr. Smith, I do want to thank you so much for giving us the statistics, because we can argue and debate all day long that we're here to bash the president. That doesn't get anything done. We know that. We can talk about why we're here. We're here to make the world a better place for the people that we represent. And if that's not your motive, then shame on you. I don't care what political party you're in that tells the story. I'm just saying that more black and brown people and people of diversity should be telling the story. Wow. So with that, thank you for that moment. Ms. Temple, and forgive me if you have answered this question because we went in so many different directions because we were so busy trying to represent one person, we forgot the people that we truly represent, the hundreds and thousands in each of our district. Can you tell me what steps that studios, networks, production companies can take to significantly increase the percentage of people of color with green light authority on their contact team over the next 5 years? You know, many times I remember recruiting at the police department and being told that, well, there's just nobody out there that can do the job. I don't believe we have very talented people of all colors, but we have to come up with creative ways if we really care about our industry to make sure that those very creative, very talented people of all color have an opportunity to participate. So Ms. Temple, that is my one question. Thank you so much for your answer.
Thank you. And I did want to say before I got into that answer that I really do appreciate hearing from all of the creators who spoke here today. They really did, eloquently talk about their personal experiences in the industry. And I think that that's really important to hear from their perspectives. And that's part of the way that we can actually jointly figure out how to do better in the industry. So definitely want to thank them for participating. As I mentioned earlier, and I alluded to a bit in my oral testimony and had a few more details in my written testimony, it's not going to be a one-stop shop. There's not one easy way to solve some of these issues. I think everybody here has recognized that these issues are long-standing, and so they're going to take a multiple-pronged approach. But I do think that some of the initiatives that I mentioned earlier that the studios are doing now will make a difference, will increase representation both in front of and behind the camera. For example, Warner Media just recently announced a production diversity report where they pledged to use their best efforts to ensure that they have a diverse cast and crew. CBS Studios has announced that its development and writers' rooms by the 2021-22 season will have 25% of the script development budget will be allocated to diverse creators and 40% to diverse writers. So I could go on and on. Each one of the studios has recognized that there is an issue and has committed in very concrete ways to make sure that those issues can be addressed. And again, it's not going to be one program, I don't think, that will solve everything, but a combination of these types of programs and conversations, quite frankly, with the creators that are here today and with you on ways that the industry can work together to move forward, I think will go a long way to making things better.
We'll reach out to you. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
I'd like to respond to Ms. Dennings calling me out.
No. The gentlelady.
Am I able to respond? She did mention my name and call me out. I'd just like to respond.
Gentlelady yielded back. Mr. Correa is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to ask for unanimous consent to enter into the record 2 letters, one by Pepe Serna, that'll be published in the Latin Heat Entertainment, a Latino media industry publication, and a letter from the National Hispanic Media Coalition.
Without objection.
Well. Just want to confirm, Mr. Chairman, that this hearing is about diversity in the media, not about the president, not about other issues. Mm-hmm. This is about diversity in the media. And if I may start with one statement, which is one nation under God with liberty and justice for all. I grew up as a kid believing in that. This great country, equality. And then after a while, you realize you're a little bit different than the other kids. Where you live, how you live, poverty, and the things kids tell you day in and day out. Then you begin to notice the media that molds, affects attitudes, predispositions on who you are, and as a community, what your contributions are to this country. Mr. Olmos said something very interesting, and it reminded me of all those World War II veterans in my district, all of them highly decorated, yet you never read about them anywhere. Jose Angel Garibay, the first casualty of war in the Iraq War, a dreamer in my district. And every time I quiz kids, people in my district, veterans, who was this man? Nobody knows. And that's because we choose not to focus on these individuals. I want to come back to the issue of media in our society. Heard some folks talking about the role of government and that only the best and brightest should get those roles in media. Only the best and brightest should be there. And yet, let me tell you something, that in my opinion, media is not totally about free market, free enterprise. Media is subsidized by the government. Media is regulated by the government, and therefore we as elected officials have a role on what media is about in our society. When I was in the California State Legislature, every year, Motion Picture Association would come to Sacramento and ask for hundreds of millions of dollars to make sure that there was no runaway production from the state of California. So you talk about government, free enterprise, no such distinction. Yet at the same time today, we're talking about things like the mob. This issue is not new. I've been addressing the Latinos in the media since the early 90s. Congressional Hispanic Caucus has been meeting with folks like Jack Valenti for the last 20 years. No change. So in my limited less than 2 minutes left, I'm going to ask Ms. Smith, Ms. Temple, what is it that we have to do to change the outcomes, the people in front and the back of the cameras? What is it that we need to do to change? And I don't see change coming. Ms. Smith, what do we have to do to address these bottlenecks in the media, in the way they portray people of color today in America?
That's a great question. And in my written testimony, I go on at length about solutions for change. Until you change hiring practices, these numbers will not move. A lot of the numbers.
So what do you do to change the hiring practices? We've been at this for 30 years, 40 years.
Two things, sir. One is that these companies have to set target inclusion goals. They have to make those publicly accountable. They have to have a strategy for change. And they have to have objective and quantifiable criteria on who they're going to hire, because that reduces bias.
And Ms. Smith, I look forward to working with you on these issues, because those are great words, great objectives, but I want more. And Mr. Olmos.
Can I say something else, sir?
Mr. Olmos, I've got 30 seconds left. I will talk to you later on off the screen, so to speak. Mr. Olmos, I just want to thank you very much for investing in our communities. I represent Santa Ana High School, where you have donated your own private library and resources to create a multimedia center under your name. That's what we need to do to move the ball forward. And again, Mr. Chairman, I hope we continue to have these kinds of hearings, not one every 2 or 3 years, but consistently, to see how we're moving the ball forward. With that being said, I yield the remainder of my time. Thank you very much.
The gentleman yields back. Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for hosting this very important hearing. And I wanted to ask Mr. Whitlock, and by the way, I want to commend all of the witnesses for your excellent testimony. Mr. Whitlock, you are a sports journalist, obviously dabbling in right-wing Republican politics. I wanted to ask you, did you have the opportunity to see the Black Panther, the movie?
Of course I saw the movie, yeah.
What did you think about it? What did you think about it?
Participated and voted in any politics, so.
Well, what did you think about the movie?
I thought it was fine.
Did you?
I thought it was fine. I thought it was a good movie.
What was it about the movie that made it such a grand success?
Oh, I think they invested a lot of money in it. You get what you pay for. And, having lived out in Los Angeles and Hollywood for a long time, the amount of money invested in a movie a lot of times determines its level of success. They invested a lot of money. It's America.
Well, I guess it being a black film, though, it didn't get as much money invested in it as some of the other films that have been blockbusters. Would you agree?
I have no idea. That would be speculation on my part.
Well, would you
You've
be
got the facts
surprised?
presented.
Would you be surprised to learn that other films that were less of a blockbuster, but they were majority films directed to a majority audience, lots of money invested, but they weren't as big as the Black Panther?
Mr. Johnson, I'm a journalist. I need some facts to work with.
I'm
I
just
hear
trying
you're
to.
offering some opinion.
I'm
Do
trying
you
to
have
find
the
out from
numbers?
you whether or not it was the content of the movie as opposed to the investment that made it the blockbuster. What do you think?
I'm not a movie critic. I'm a sports journalist.
Well, you're also
primarily.
dabbling in right-wing politics too. But I'm just
I don't
asking you
think
about the
I'm
movie
dabbling in
because
right-wing
we're talking about
Well,
movies
let's
and
say I
film
took-
production
let's say
today.
I took your false narrative as fact. Let's say I took your false narrative as fact that I dabble in right-wing politics. How does that qualify me to talk about a movie?
Well, that's
I'm a
why I'm
sports
wondering why
journalist.
you are here today. I mean,
Because
you
I'm here to
apparently
talk
were
about
told
the
that this
media.
hearing, the subject was different than the one that you are here to testify about. And I just
I'm here to
wanted to
testify
I
about
just
the
wanted
Black
to find
Panther.
out from you whether or not you got
This hearing
anything
about the Black
positive out
Panther.
of the Black Panther movie or not. Let me go
Is
to
this
Miss
hearing
Villa
about the Black
and
Panther?
ask Miss Villa whether or not she.
Thank you.
What were your?
Of course, I was a fan of that movie. And if you're talking budgets, it shows that you are absolutely not in the entertainment industry. Budgets are not racist. They're allocated towards who's starring in the movie, what production company is behind the movie. The movie was excellent. We're
Why?
not going to deny
Why?
that.
Why was it excellent?
It was excellent because it's a superhero movie
Okay.
that stars an incredible superhero who's a nationalist, who wants the best for his nation, just like Donald Trump.
Was there anything about the fact that it was?
You want me to
black-
say because it's a black man in the
black
movie?
Superhero that,
I love the movie being about a superhero who is undeniably black
in
and
fact, we hadn't
African and
seen-
running his nation.
We haven't seen that many black superhero movies.
We haven't.
In this country.
But making a mandate,
isn't
making
it-
it illegal
isn't
unless
it a-
you absolutely have a certain representation is only going to hurt filmmakers.
see,
Now, I'd like to show you some of the
Well, now,
films
hold
we
on,
have
hold
seen.
on now. I'm not gonna
Since
let you take over-
2017, the
I'm not
Oscar
gonna let you
nominations
take over the
included.
hearing, ma'am. I'm asking
You asked
the
me a question, I'm answering
No,
the
no,
question.
no, I'm finished with
Moonlight,
your
Hidden
answer,
Figures,
and I'm ready
Loving,
to move on to,
Fences, Lion,
another
Call Me by Your
question.
Name, Green Book,
Gentleman- the
Bohemian
gentleman
Rhapsody, Roma. I'm
gentleman
answering the
controls-
question.
No, you're not
Gentleman
answering the question.
controls the
These
time.
all have people with of
Gentleman
color.
controls the time.
Mr. Chairman,
Let me digress. if
Is
you
this the
will, to
View or
Miss-
is this
to
Congress?
Miss Alexander. And Miss Alexander, what was it about the Black Panther movie that
Unbelievable.
was such that was so profound in your view that made it a blockbuster?
Well, certainly a lot of money was spent to make it, and that can make the difference sometimes. It was the content that mattered. It was the fact that for many years when Jack Kirby and Stanley made that movie, it took someone like Christopher Priest to create the characters to jump off the screen, another screenwriter of color, to make it the Panther we saw it. And by the way, budgets can be inherently racist, not because that the amount of money you allocate to something shows what you value. So I'd like to say that one of the reasons why it was so fantastic is because we hadn't seen that represented before on screen in that way. And everybody went for it, black, brown, and otherwise. It was an outstanding example that storytelling and representation matters.
Thank you, and with that, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Mr. Jeffries.
Thank the distinguished chair for holding this very important hearing and for your leadership. I'm proud to represent the 8th Congressional District in Brooklyn and Queens, and also was proud to be the lead Democratic co-sponsor of the First Step Act, which was a bipartisan success, of course, and exited the House of Representatives as a result of the efforts of many Democrats on our side of the aisle. So I'm gonna resist the temptation to participate in the charade that some are trying to engage in, and I'm gonna ask some serious questions because this is a serious issue that we're confronting. Ms. Alexander, you've had an extraordinary career,
Yes, sir.
and you've seen a lot of changes, I would assume, that are positive in nature, and also some issues that remain to be dealt with. And so I'd be interested in hearing, from you in terms of what has improved, but what remains in desperate need of improvement to this very moment.
Thank you, sir, for the question. What has improved is that there are more showrunners who are in positions of power to make the types of shows that can be full of diversity. And that matters because we need to train people to be in those positions. That's not a naturally inherent skill set that people has. And I have to give shout out to people like Yvette Lee Bowser and Katori Hall, Shonda Rhimes. Those are the showrunners we're talking about. We also should look and invest in culture early on. That means funding in arts and schools and making sure that people are aware of how to think. There's a certain type of discernment to coming to the arts, how you think, who you think. We certainly are in favor of diversity of thought. So I'd like to give a shout out and say to anybody that wants to come into this, that if you have diversity of thought, you should make a show that shows that. If you see that there's a real gap in it, please put forward a TV show or a film or something to show your point of view. But that's what could help. We need to train people, and we need to make sure the showrunners and the people are in those positions, including producers, are funded, but not only that, that we support them.
Now, to Mrs. Temple, you've acknowledged that there have been some challenges with the industry, over time. I think that's no surprise because there have been challenges here in America in terms of dealing with the systemic racism, the structural racism, as Ms. Alexander has put it, that from my vantage point has obviously been in the soil of this country for 401 years. We've come a long way. We still have a long way to go. But in terms of diversity, it's not just, from my standpoint, a feel-good thing. Isn't Black Panther evidence of the fact that when you reflect diverse perspectives to capture the gorgeous mosaic of the American people, that you actually are far more likely to have a productive success in terms of the financial bottom line?
Yeah, that is exactly right. In fact, the Motion Picture Association is very proud of the fact that, we do an annual theme report every year, which does, assesses demographics and the theatrical market. And it does show that more diversity in front of the camera is actually a positive thing, and that it does actually matter to the bottom line of films. Other studies have shown that less diverse films actually do less well in the box office. So this is not an existential issue, so to speak. It is one where there are real world benefits to having, films that reflect everyone, because audiences are diverse. Our theme report and other statistics shows that audiences are diverse, that, Latinos are some of our best consumers of films. And so they want to be represented in film and should be. And so I think that, yes, you're exactly right, that this is an issue that really shows how important it is for us to consider diversity from all perspectives and ensure that our films reflect the society that goes to see our films.
Thank you. Now, lastly, in the time that I have remaining, the death of George Floyd, which he narrated that murder for 8 minutes and 46 seconds and cried out for his mother, seems to have created an inflection point for many in this country in terms of dealing with the challenges of systemic racism. How has Hollywood responded to that particular moment?
I am really proud of the way that Hollywood responded to that moment, honestly. We all of the studios and the Motion Pictures Association stated unequivocally that Black Lives Matter. The Motion Picture Association itself is headquartered on Black Lives Matter Plaza. Our studios have given millions and millions of dollars on racial and social justice issues since the events of this summer. We even supported police reform legislation as well in this very House. So, I think that this is something that really shows how important it is and how responsible the studios feel as well, that they are part of making the society as a whole a better place for everyone.
Thank you. My time has expired.
Gentleman yields back. Ms. Garcia.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you so very much. And I can tell you that I was part of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus delegation that did the CODEL to Hollywood and to the studios last November. And since then, this has been a concern for many of us. And Mr. Chairman, I really appreciate that you are holding this hearing because it is not just an important topic to the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, but to all our colleagues here in Judiciary and to many Americans across the nation. What we see is important. I can personally tell you that growing up, I really did think that everybody dressed in a mariachi outfit and sang Spanish songs and had a great time in a hacienda-looking house, because the only access I had was a drive-in movie theater that showed Mexican movies. And I always wondered why I didn't look like them, because I'm not as dark or I have the brown eyes like many of what I saw. So I know that what you see, especially for children, is very important. The film industry is a main narrative creating and image defining institution of American society and a powerful medium for educating or indoctrinating our citizens. The visual basis of film gives it a universal power of communication. This historic hearing comes at a time where studies from major universities have shown us the lack of diversity in Hollywood, both in front and behind the camera. And I can tell you that unfortunately, Latinos continue to be depicted in very negative stereotypes by and large, if we are represented at all. We're either the drug dealers, the illegal immigrants, the aliens, the criminals, or if you happen to be a female, you're probably the maid that comes in to ask if they need anything else in a broken English. So just last year, Latinos made up 4.6% of all film roles, while Black people made up 15.7%. In disproportionate comparison to whites, who made up 67.3% of all films. And you all can see that in the chart. And Mr. Chairman, I do have a copy for the record if I can please get that unanimous consent. Thank you. Further, women made up less than 44% of film leads, less than 15% of film directors, and less than 17% of film writers. This is especially important because how we portray our underrepresented communities really does matter. Just last week, our nation suffered a great loss with the passing of our esteemed Supreme Court Justice, the Honorable Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She said it best when she brilliantly stated, quote, "Women belong in all places where decisions are made. It shouldn't be that women are the exception. Women and people of color do belong in every place, and we should not be an exception, not on the screen, not behind the camera, and not in the boardrooms of any of these studios. We must keep striving for a more perfect union, but not only discussing concrete steps media companies can take to improve representation, but also by taking action to address the stereotypical images long portrayed of people of color. Our children can't be what they can't see. And we have a responsibility to ensure that the media helps our youth envision the world and the world of possibilities of what they can be. With that in mind, I wanted to start with our friend from the Studios Association and ask a question. When we visited last November, we met with Paramount, Universal, Netflix, Disney, Warner, and Sony, among others. And one of the things that really disturbed me was that although they were addressing the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, and they knew we were there for diversity and inclusion issues, many of them couldn't tell us any of the numbers, like the numbers up here. So do you make any attempt as an association to work with your studios to make sure that they keep track of the number of films that they make that address some of our concerns today? How many leads are minority? How many people are in the studio in front of the camera, behind the camera? What efforts does your association make?
Well, I will say that, I mentioned earlier the theme report, which is a report that the Motion Picture Association puts out. It's more broadly on demographic information about our theatrical releases, but it does help make a business case about the importance of diversity because it shows.
But do you actually keep track and file a yearly report so that the public can see what you all are doing or not doing?
Well, I will say that the studios do participate and support the Annenberg Diversity Initiative, and I know, so I don't want to speak for the other witness, but that does actually.
No, but my question was, what do you, as the Association for the Studios, do to monitor and keep track and report?
The gentlelady's time has expired. The witness may answer the question.
As I said, what we do is the theme report, which goes into the demographic areas of the theatrical releases, and then we support a number of the initiatives that are independent reports, which I think people actually want in terms of the way that diversity is represented on film. So 4 studios are partners, as I said, with the Annenberg Diversity Initiative. 3 executives of our member studios are on the initiative's advisory board. So this is, something that we might not do ourselves, but do support others, making sure that they have that information to be able to independently review these issues and provide that information to the public.
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, I know my time is up, but I do have another unanimous consent request on a statement from Alma Martinez, who is an accomplished American film, television, and theatrical actor. She is a voting member of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and longtime mentor to up-and-coming actors. This is a statement she would about Latinas in Hollywood. Ask for unanimous consent. Thank you. I yield back.
I now yield to the distinguished gentlelady from the great state of Florida, Representative Wickesar Powell.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all the witnesses for coming and talking about, I think, a very important issue. The media, we all know how much the media and the entertainment industry shape our view of the world. It shapes actually the thoughts of our children and the Americans that they choose to grow up to be. I'm a Latina mother here in South Florida. I have 2 kids. And when I go to a movie theater, when I have them watching shows and they see the Latino community being portrayed, I want them to see a Latino community that they're proud of, that they can relate to, that reflects who they are. It's the same for all the kids living here in my district. I represent a district that's 70% Hispanic, 12 to 13% African American, and yet when they're watching these films, it's very difficult for them to relate. And what happens? They grow up trying to be someone who they're not because they're just always trying to fit in. Here in Miami, we also have the largest media companies that serve Latino viewers and listeners in the United States. We have the headquarters for Univision, Telemundo, Caracol, Mega TV. Those are all Spanish-serving, broad media that are broadcasting these shows. And unfortunately, what we're seeing more than anything is that they're not portraying the reality of our diversity in the Latino community. Here in Florida International University, our university down here has the only 100% Spanish language journalism program in the nation. I don't know why we only have to have one, but I'm proud to say that it's here in Miami at Florida International University. The economic and the media production footprint is enormous, and we understand what so often Hollywood doesn't seem to understand. We understand the importance, not just of diversity in the media, but also the fair and the positive portrayals in the media. The term Latino is very broad. It includes a diverse range of people, cultures, values. We look differently, we speak with different accents, but too often we see one singular stereotype that comes across on TV and film. And one study found that Latinos in the media are primarily portrayed as laborers, law enforcement, or criminals. Another study, our witness, Dr. Smith, worked on actually, found that of the top 200 movies in 2017 and in 2018, 1 in 4 Latino characters were shown as criminals. 1 in 8 were shown as poor, and over half of the Latinos with jobs had one that did not require a college degree. These are stereotypes that influence a negative perception among the American people, and our media industries must take responsibility and recognize the role that they play in shaping our inclusive landscape. I know that one group here in Miami is working for the fair portrayal of Cubans. I recently spoke with Eduardo Garcia of the organization Facts About Cuban Exiles. The group was started in 1982 to defend the image of Cuban exiles and to promote and improve the reputation and image of people of Cuban origin and their descendants in the United States, especially here in Miami. And they began their work after troubling portrayals in mainstream film and the television of that era. So organizations like this are so much needed to raise awareness on these issues. I wanted to start with Mr. Olmos. A big fan of all your work. I'm so glad to see that you're working on educating our children. I think that that's so important. Let me ask you, how do you think we need to combat these stereotypes? What can we do? Where do we start?
We start by understanding what a stereotype is. And the stereotype is a fact, a truth. But if it's the only thing that you see, then it's completely gone to waste. I mean, our lives it's over for us because basically they only see us one way. And my biggest concern is that our children are watching. So for me, how do we change that? By writing, producing, directing, being behind the camera as well as in front of the camera, taking over. And like Tyler Perry, we have to start our own studios and move forward creating our own product.
Thank you so much, Mr. Olmos. Quick question to Ms. Temple. Ms. Temple, bringing diversity to the industry is a major issue, but how do we act to correct the negative portrayal of Latinos that we see in film all the time?
Yes, as I alluded to earlier, we agree that work needs to be done in this area. I think it's taking a step back and trying to do innovative initiatives to try to address, each one of these issues as we see them. So, for example, Universal Studios recently teamed with the Gina Davis Institute and USC to launch the Spell Check for Bias, which is a resource that will support Latino representation. They'll analyze scripts, manuscripts, and advertising briefs to ensure and check the representation of characters and the percentage of dialogue. So innovative, I think new and proactive initiatives like that are what we need to think about to try to really address this problem.
Thank you so much, Chairman. My time is up. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Mr. Armstrong.
Thank the gentleman for yielding. I just wanted to give our witnesses a chance to respond. My understanding when I was at a vote earlier that there were some points made and questions raised and no ability for Ms. Villa and Mr. Whitlock to respond. That's not unusual for this committee. They did it to the Attorney General. So Ms. Villa, I'll give you an opportunity to if we can, maybe you go a couple minutes and I'll give a couple minutes to Mr. Whitlock to respond to anything that was raised earlier that you'd like to respond to.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Jordan. I want to ask, why has nobody brought up China? So China, media giants such as Disney are absolutely taking over human rights abuses by working with China. I mean, they have operated around internment camps in China. Mulan, the movie, was filmed in China with a gross gross violations against human rights and abuses. Their stance on equality as it pertains to the United States is that they don't care about it. They're bought out by by money, and they're owning an American commodity that should be something that American voices can be backed by. And we talk about diversity, but if we don't have diversity behind the scenes when it comes to making sure American-owned products are American-owned, then it's going to go to foreign voices, and that's a problem. That's a big issue. As well as I wanted to say, to respond to Ms. Dennings, we brought up Black Lives Matter, and then said that, oh, I don't know what this whole thing is about, and proceeded to keep talking. I wasn't able to respond, but I'm going to respond now. I'm going to say that it's important for representation of thought.
For the record, I did not bring up Black Lives Matter. I talked about we were all over the place in our discussions.
But your side, the Democrats have been all over the place. I spoke about diversity in media, and Democrats have brought up this president
Madam
and then
Chair.
shut me down when I attempted to respond.
Madam Chair, it's my time. I'd like an additional 20 seconds added, and Ms. Villa can answer a question that was posed to her earlier.
Thank you.
And I'd like a couple minutes for Mr. Whitlock.
Thank you. So, Ms. Demings, since 2017, Oscar nominations have included Moonlight, Hidden Figures, Loving, Fences, Lion, Call Me By Your Name, Green Book, Bohemian Rhapsody, Roma, If Beale Street Could Talk, Black Panther. In 2017, a Black actor was nominated in every acting category. Hollywood is disproportionately run by Democrats. This is a Democrat-run council here. This event was put on by Democrats. So why can't you guys get it right with diversity? It's because you don't have Republican representation there. It's because you don't talk about diversity of thought. It's because you just want to put people who are Black and brown under, oh, they are Black, so I'm going to agree with them, rather than what products are they bringing to the table. Diversity of thought is the biggest issue here.
Mr. Whitlock, let me just pose a question to you. There was a New York Times piece from July of this year, and the headline read, "Are protests dangerous?" This is relative to the COVID-19 concern, our pandemic. "Are protests dangerous?" And then the headline reads, "What experts say may depend on who's protesting what." This is how absurd it gets. This is how politically correct it gets. You can't get COVID if you're protesting certain left-wing approved causes. But if you're protesting conservative causes, oh my goodness, it's COVID. COVID knows the difference between protesting about not being able to go to church or a loved one's funeral or protesting about some other issue. I mean, this is amazing to me. So you got the last minute and 20 seconds here, Mr. Whitlock.
Well, I think my overall point is we can talk about skin color diversity, but if everybody has to say the exact same thing, because that's what Silicon Valley and the social media matrix that they've built dictates, what difference does it make what color you are? It just doesn't. And so I've said and listened throughout the day, and we've certainly heard from the Latino community about how they're portrayed in movies. Who's in control of this? And for me as a Black man, I look at the music industry and how Black men are portrayed in the music industry, particularly in hip hop. Who's in control of the music industry? Who's in control of Hollywood? It's pretty clear that it's the left, and this is how we're being portrayed in the music and movie industry, and no one wants to speak out against it. That's where my frustration comes with talking about the president or things like that. There are just much bigger issues. And again, I'll just repeat, when it comes to skin color diversity, there's only one thing you're allowed to say by Hollywood, by the cancel culture
Mr.
group.
Whitlock.
And so it renders color almost irrelevant.
Thank you.
The gentleman's time has expired. I now yield myself 5 minutes. I'd like to first thank Chairman Nadler for having this hearing, and I want to recognize and thank the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Chairman Joaquin Castro for pushing on our committee to have this hearing, this very important hearing today. And I also want to thank members of the Tri-Caucus. There really should be absolutely no question that we've seen an increase in racism in our country. In fact, there has been an increase in hate crimes in our country since 2016. That is the year that then candidate Donald Trump announced that he believed Mexicans are rapists and criminals, described immigrants as an invasion, and he essentially announced to the world that it was okay for the highest leader in the land to be a racist. When the person with the biggest bully pulpit and the loudest voice who is bolstered by his enablers, portrays Black and brown people in the most negative light, it matters. And when the media and film industries perpetuate damaging stereotypes, it matters. The Congressional Hispanic Caucus has been working to expose the connection between both the lack of representation of Latinos in the industry and the misrepresentation of who we are with the way that we are perceived by society. And I'll tell you, I love films, and for many of you who are zooming in, I have been big fans for a long time. I love going to the movies, but growing up, I remember watching Latinos portrayed as gangsters, maids, or undocumented immigrants. I never saw a Latino or Latina portrayed as a member of Congress, which I am so privileged to be today. That portrayal matters. Now, things have gotten better in the industry, but the pace is absolutely unacceptable. When we look back over more than a decade at the data, looking at Latino leads and co-leads since 2007, Latino representation is still limited. In 2007, Latinos made up 1% of leads and co-leads. 11 years later, in 2018, that number is now a whopping 4%. Ms. Temple, based on your testimony today, it seems like you agree that the industry is, in part, responsible for societal misperceptions of Latinos. Would you agree? Historically.
Well, I would definitely agree that the portrayal on screen has not been accurate when it comes to persons of color, including Latinos and African Americans and others. And that's something that the studios are definitely aware of and working against. One of the ways to do that, of course, is to ensure that you have diversity in the writing rooms, which is a focus. And I've talked a lot about some of the initiatives that the studios have to increase diversity in the writers' rooms so that, again, there are people who will be able to accurately reflect, those in front of the cameras. I also mentioned a little bit earlier the fact that a number of the studios work with consultants and affiliation groups, again, to address the issue of making sure that portrayals are not stereotypical, but that they are instead accurate portrayals, and they reflect the broadness of the community.
I appreciate that, and you did a good job laying out at the beginning of the hearing in your opening statement the work that the industry is doing. What we have seen, especially over this past summer, and in fact, for years now, is a reckoning, a real reckoning on race. We have seen people, hundreds of thousands of Americans marching in the streets, demanding change, demanding action. The changes that you outlined, while I am so grateful for them, and while they are long overdue, do you really believe they meet the urgency of this moment? A simple yes or no, please. I'm running out of time.
I can't answer yes or no, but I can say that we agree that more needs to be done. And so I don't want to just narrowly say, has everything we've done been
Ms.
sufficient?
Temple, I'm going to take my time back. I simply wanted your opinion. I wanted to know if you believe the industry is meeting the urgency of the moment. I personally do not believe it is. Do we have your commitment that in addition to what you've outlined, that you will look at accelerating the work that needs to be done in order to meet the urgency of this moment, yes or no?
Yes, you have my commitment, and I'm happy to work with all of the studios to continue this dialogue with you directly.
Thank you, Ms. Temple. We will hold you to that commitment. That concludes today's hearing. We thank all of our witnesses for participating. Without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days to submit additional written questions for the witnesses or additional materials for the record. Without objection, the hearing is adjourned.